as you guys know, just like the EDL, the German version of the EDL is the AfD, right? The AfD is a party that has become more active and become more popular, specifically in East Germany, unfortunately, as well. And a lot of these, a lot of this movement, which originally was, you know, looked at with or shunned by liberals, center-right liberals, and center-left liberals, now, you know, regular old rich liberal Germans are repeating and channeling the exact same sentiment. I'm of course referencing the Sylt party. Don't you think England's under attack though? Yes, you're right. It's under attack by the top of the hour ad break. You're right. All the British are forced to see a 3-minute ad break at the top of the fucking hour. You did it. You did it. You fucking tried and you lost it, mate. You tried and you fucking failed. I hope you appreciate it. Nice try, Chepsa. But you fucking failed, mate. It's pronounced Sult. Right. We'll get to it in a second. Right. At the top of the hour, there's a 3-minute ad break. And if you no longer want to see those fucking ads, all you need to do is subscribe, yeah? Bloody hell. Subscribe for $5, 5 quid, or for free with a Twitch Prime. You want to say you can't save Europe, but you can save the top of the hour for yourself. Is the 3-minute ad break now? Anyway, so here it is. A viral video in Germany shows people singing racist lyrics and performing Nazi salutes at a club in the northern island of Sylt. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has been called to comment while police investigate. Now, this is very illegal to do in Germany, for the record. I mean, this guy's literally doing the Hitler. Like, that is the... This is the literal Hitler. Like, he's Sig Heiling while pointing to his fucking mustache. Like, that is the Hitler. This dance move is called doing the Hitler. These guests are at an exclusive club on the German island of Sylt. Each person is reported to have paid 150 euro for a ticket. When right-wing slogans or even the criminal acts such as the Hitler salute becomes a pop culture, there's a lot wrong in the country, says Johannes Wagner, the German MP for the Greens. With a Hitler mustache and champagne, and I thought it was such a phenomenon of the right-wing fringe. Apparently it's back in the fashion in the upper classes. It's disgusting. The club has distanced itself from the incident and is taking legal action. Local police have confirmed that an investigation has been launched, and the video has caused alarm throughout the governing coalition, with even the Chancellor expressing his concern here.
Solche Parolen sind eklig. Sie sind nicht akzeptabel.
Maybe some background. Sylt is basically like the Monaco of Germany, a place where all the rich people go for vacation and party. Yeah. Now, a lot of these people, like, the reason why this is big news in Germany is because this has been bubbling up for quite some time. And yes, like working class Germans with reactionary perspectives that are like AfD voters now, they've been saying shit like this. And everyone in Germany has kind of like looked down at that sentiment. But now that you got the rich people in Germany saying it, the rich liberals who are not AfD voters usually, making light of the situation and making these sorts of jokes, now it's a big problem. Now they're starting to recognize that, like, hold on, maybe this anti-immigrant sentiment, anti-refugee Islamophobic sentiment is actually is actually kind of running through parts of German society that previously would look down at such behavior.
Und darüber darf es kein Vertun geben. Und deshalb ist es auch richtig, dass all unsere Aktivitäten darauf gerichtet sind, genau zu verhindern, dass das eine Sache ist, die sich verbreitet.
Has gained notoriety in the German far-right scene. Gary, no, thank you for the 10 tier 1 gifted subs. One of the people who was there at the student was a student at my friend's university. They kicked her out, Lamau. Yeah. Germany thinks they fight anti-Semitism while growing both their Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. Our discourse shift here is the same as U.S. Extreme, nonsensical, and populistic. Yep. One of the dudes in the suit video is a member of the CDU, CSU. Aw. Shocking. Shocking seeing the center-right party become openly pro-Nazi. I would have never guessed that liberals have this sort of tendency. That certainly has never happened in Germany before. Please look at my message. The Chancellor, the Social Democrats, SPD, literally posted afterwards a Nazi slogan, Germany for Germans, but with a twist for those who defend our democracy and who stand for peace and cohesion. I remember a few years back, you told the European chatters to keep an eye out on how their countries will slowly become like the USA in regards to their shift right in politics. Yes. Except those European chatters are probably no longer with us because they also shifted right, especially after the incredibly militant attitude that people had once Russia unjustifiably invaded Ukraine. I suspect that many of those centrist, center-right, or maybe liberal German chatters, or maybe liberal European chatters became so invested in the NATO conversation that they could not recognize that their perspective was slowly but surely shifting. This, of course, is not new. Sweden has been doing this for quite a while. Many other European nations have been shifting rightward for quite a while. And unfortunately, plenty of those European EU chatters probably left and now unironically talk about how like my kind of politics is genuinely way scarier than like the Nazi sentiment expressed by whatever version of like far right radicalism that occurs on in their own countries.
Spy chief has told the BBC that the far-right Alternative for Deutschland party poses a risk to the roots of democracy. The AfD regularly rejects accusations of extremism, but the BBC has found clear links between significant party figures and extremists or even former neo-Nazi networks by investigating just one event held in the East German city of Cottbus. Our Berlin correspondent Jessica Parker has this report.
In Germany's east, the far-right Alternative for Deutschland is popular, even aiming for power. And Jean-Pascal Homme is a regional parliamentary candidate.
The AfD is proactive on social media, but also on the ground, and it feeds this idea they want to promote, that they are of the people and taking on the establishment.
But, as the BBC has found, Jean-Pascal Homme's held links with several groups now classed by domestic intelligence as extremist, networks accused of anti-migrant, anti-Muslim ideology.
All these organizations focus on one subject, the theme of our times. It is the population replacement going on in Germany and in Europe. To voice that and to fight that politically is not extremist.
You don't think the Great Replacement theory is extremist? I mean, it's a far-right conspiracy theory.
Nein, der große Austausch findet statt. Das sehe ich in meiner
No, the great replacement is happening. I can see that in my own city. I do not say it is organized from up high. I say it's happening.
It was at this office back in March that Jean-Pascal Homme helped organise an event. The speaker was an MP called Matthias Helfferich, who once described himself as the friendly face of National Socialism, also known as Nazism.
Matthias Helfferich insists the years-old leaked messages were satire. His talk here in Cottbus was on remigration, a code word, say many, for mass deportations.
Remigration ist die politische Vision einer vertrauten Heimat.
In this video, he talks about remigrating millions to preserve the land of the Germans.
Und aktivistischem Vorfeld.
In the audience in Cottbus that night was Benedikt Kaiser, another influential figure. He works for an AfD MP. But over a decade ago, Mr. Kaiser was pictured at neo-Nazi demos. We've approached him for comment.
Became more and more right-wing extremists.
This spy chief claims that extremism within the AfD poses a risk to democracy.
When I'm speaking about a German oak, a big, strong, old tree, it can take a blizzard, it can take a storm. But once you have an enemy that goes for the roots, and that's exactly what's happening right now, going for the roots of our democracy, it's very dangerous because it goes to the vital parts of our democracy.
What is it about the 20s and 30s of centuries that fascism just loves to go full mask off? I mean, it's a cycle, right? It takes 100 years for this level of resentment to build up once again.
The AfD says it's being smeared by a biased establishment, and as the country builds towards regional and EU elections, this isn't a fringe movement, but one trying to go mainstream. Jessica Parker, BBC News in Brandenburg.
Let's speak to Assistant Professor of Political Science at Boise State University.
Where are Roaring 20s? Bro, what do you think the Roaring 20s meant for the average working class person? Fuck. It's look around, dude. The Roaring 20s, in the way that it's like mentioned in The Great Gatsby and the like, was roaring for the fucking elites. As it is currently, you know, just wasn't exactly great for the average person.
University, Julia Van Dusky. Julia, welcome to you. You've written about the rise of the AfD in Germany, haven't you? How?
Yeah, mega yacht sales are looking better than ever. You know what I mean? Shit's popping. Entire industries specifically dedicated to serving the wealthiest individuals in society. Meanwhile, the average person can't fucking purchase a house. Has no meaningful way of creating permanent shelter for themselves.
Far-reaching are its links with the far right, would you say?
So the German government has been investigating the AfD for quite a while because it is known that many of its members do have links to the far right. So it is far-reaching.
Now the far right...
Yeah, we're literally doing space tourism and shit. Like, think about that. Likely through populism on TikTok, etc., young people are faster prone to become far-right. AfD's in second place for young people. No, I don't think it's populism from TikTok. I think it's economic instability and volatility. I am never going to look at like one singular social media platform. No, these are far larger issues. There are far larger systematic problems that are creating the exact same results. It's austerity. It's austerity. It's the horrifying material conditions, a lack of future prospects for the younger generation that's breaking their minds. And because of neoliberalism's power, specifically gutting and eviscerating any kind of leftist opposition, there isn't even like a genuine communist counter, nor even a trade unionist one, nor even a socialist one, as it existed in at least the earlier stages in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, where there was one. Volodymyr Zelensky said, "Why is the upper class supporting this then?" Well, it's one should ask that same question about what the upper class was doing supporting it in the 20s. Both in the United States of America and in Germany, capital owners absolutely funded and facilitated fascism. Fascist plots were occurring both in America and also in Germany as well, as you know. And the reason for that was because fascism is seen as a way to instill order. It's a way to reinforce the exact same. It's a way to reinforce the hierarchies by very violent means in general. Capitalism decays inevitably due to the weight of its own contradictions, and then when in that decay, there's a lot of volatility, a lot of instability. Then there's also even the pesky alternatives to said instability. People that want to evolve from capitalism to something that is a little bit more just. And capital owners obviously benefit from the existing hierarchies. So what do? Well, they side with the fascists. They fund the fascists. Because what do fascists do? They're not real socialists. They're not genuinely interested in class struggle. They're interested in stopping class struggle. Yes, yesterday a video went viral with upper class kids chanting xenophobic slurs. I know, that's how we started this conversation.
The AfD, rather, political party, is gaining in popularity, isn't it, in Germany? What would you put that down to?
So the AfD originally formed as a response to the Eurozone crisis. There are a lot of Germans who do not support the EU, and they don't support Germany's role in the EU. And so now there's a party that represents their interests. They're more popular in East Germany amongst older people who had been socialized under a completely different political system. They lived under communism and an authoritarian regime. So politically, they're a little bit different than West Germans. So it's not surprising that the AfD is a little bit more popular there.
And what do you think it means for the future democracy of Germany, or would that be alarmist to even go there?
What a phenomenally stupid liberal analysis of the situation. I wonder why East Germany would be more susceptible to right-wing populism like this. Oh, I'm sure it's because they grew up under communism. No, perhaps it has something to do with the fact that the material development of East Germany was stunted deliberately in comparison to West Germany. That was beefed up by both the Marshall Plan and American investment. That's it. The reasons as to why there is more reactionary sentiment in East Germany is because East Germany was left behind. This is also false. They're most popular among the population that grew up in the aftermath of the reunification, born around 85, 95.
There.
Currently, I don't think the AfD is going anywhere. However, I don't think they're big.
So capitalism brought wealth and communism brought poverty? Yes. That's what I'm saying.
Enough currently to ever form a government in Germany. They're still quite small. And the other parties, the mainstream parties, are unlikely to form a government with them. So in the short term, they can make a lot of noise. They have a platform in parliament, but I don't think they're going to have a lot of influence over policymaking.
Okay, Professor Julie Van Dusky, thank you very much.
Only recently, Olaf Scholz was on the cover of Der Spiegel with the quote, "We must finally start to deport in a big fashion." I wonder how saying that shit became more mainstream. Yep. The West will do liberal shock therapy to former communist areas and then blame communism when that shock therapy plays its course. Yes. It's funny, the thing that apparently the girl we saw in the video shared a story where she wrote Best DJ insult from Palestine, and instead of the Palestine flag, she posted the flag of Kuwait. She was literally like, look at my foreign friend. The guy was just a DJ. Yeah. You should react to Bes D Marx video on Weimar, Germany. I have. I'm pretty sure I have. In your opinion, do you think fascism will rise and prevail without resistance since there's no USSR anymore? Do you think, for example, China would be a nation willing to rescue the West? I don't know. I think China is very self-interested. You know? Hold on one second. I have to also look at something here. I guess the USSR was also self-interested, though, in many ways. Hold up. Waiting to get in. Y'all are live. Also join. I'm waiting for my team to get in on Rust. There's a Bes D Part 2 called the Gehlen Organization that you didn't watch. Let's see. Leftist uprising took out many fascist regimes without outside help from the USSR. Let's see. How Nazism Survived Germany. We watched How Nazism Survived Germany. Organisation Gehlen. We didn't watch that part, but there was also another thing that I kind of wanted to see. The Betrayal of the German Revolution, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. This talks extensively in detail, I suspect, about the whole like liberals betraying KPD, siding with the fascists, and the rise of Nazi Germany. The Betrayal of the Revolution was what I was talking about. Is the Rust server public? No.
After World War I, Germany was on the brink of a successful proletarian revolution. For many people, this period is known merely as representing a change from the German monarchy to the Weimar Republic. In fact, most people are not even aware that there was a revolution at all. There are videos on the internet about this topic, but there is little deeper analysis of the political forces that were crucial in not only determining the future of Germany, but the future of Europe, and arguably the future of the whole world. Chris Harman says that without understanding this period, one can have but an incomplete understanding of the rise of Adolf Hitler and the massacre of World War II. It is in these years that the swastika entered the political stage as a symbol of reaction, anti-communism, and counter-revolution. It is quite reasonable to hypothesize that if the, at the time, world's second most powerful industrial nation had turned socialist, the rising workers' movement all over Europe could have had a powerful ally to bring about socialism in their own countries, adding to the massive revolutionary flame that had been ignited in Russia. Russia was a relatively backward country in terms of industrial development. The Bolshevik revolutionaries were hoping and even expecting the victory in Germany as a result of a chain reaction, which would benefit them as it wouldn't leave them isolated on the international stage. Their leader, Vladimir Lenin, declared only months after the successful October Revolution in 1917 that, quote, "Without the revolution in Germany, we are doomed." Since the communist movement fundamentally hinges on the unity of the international working class, it would have been of
what could have been, chatters,
massive benefit to have an industrially developed socialist ally to support the construction of socialism in Russia.
To be fair, we don't know. We don't know what Europe would look like There could have been a battle line drawn where internal pressures might have escalated against FDR. Maybe the business plot succeeds in that circumstance. Maybe FDR never, maybe the New Deal never occurs. And America is the continuation led by the American Bund movement. Maybe America is the continuation of fascist autocracy, and they try to fight and plunder the rest of the world, and the United States becomes the Germany of World War II. So there's also that aspect of it as well. America turned fascist? No, I mean, America was aligned against the fascists in World War II. But as I say all the time, as I like reiterating all the time, things could have been very different for America.
And likewise, it was the Great October Revolution that massively accelerated and supported the establishment of councils all over Hungary, Austria, or Germany. Quote, "We shall achieve victory only together with all the workers of other countries of the whole world," Lenin stated later in April 1918. Defeated revolutions are quickly forgotten, yet from the perspective of the working class, this revolution should not be brushed aside. There is not only lots of lessons to be drawn from this period, but it is immensely inspiring to have history reaffirm that workers' power in Europe is possible, despite the sheer strength of the capitalist class.
There are way more Germans who hate Nazis than Nazis. Please acknowledge that. Brother, I'm talking about, and this video is detailing something that you are, I think, unable to understand, perhaps as a German person yourself. We're talking about German liberalism and how it made way for the Nazi movement, how it actually developed momentum for the Nazi movement. This entire video is directly about all of those people who ostensibly now hate the Nazis, because the exact same attitude is growing. The exact same sentiment is growing in Germany at this moment. We're looking at history in order not to repeat its mistakes, but you are, it seems, unable to understand that and are literally saying, no, 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 we will repeat those mistakes actually, and you will shut the fuck up about it, as we are in the process of repeating said mistakes in Germany.
It is this explosive potential of revolutionary inspiration that is among the reasons the history of the German Revolution is twisted or straight up denied. Quote, "A German revolution after World War I? A West German undergraduate in my German history survey indicated she had never heard of such a thing, and until the 1960s the same was probably true of most Western academics," said Robert Wheeler in the late 70s. Winston Churchill derided it by claiming it was part of a Jewish conspiracy. Of course, other liberal commentators state that it was in this period that democracy won against dictatorship. Another reason this revolution is not mentioned very often is that it is a period of great shame for the supposedly progressive liberal forces, since it showed how they had zero concerns about collaborating with the most reactionary and bloodthirsty elements of society in crushing the movements that endanger the capitalist system. In Germany, the party mainly responsible for that cooperation, the SPD, has been one of the main ruling forces in the German government ever since, now claiming the chancellor position with Olaf Scholz since 2021. The story of the German Revolution is the story of how that party evolved from the, at the time, most developed Marxist organization to an open representative of capitalism, a supporter of imperialist war and a defender of class society. It is thus key in understanding today's left and the nominally left social democratic parties, since what had become concrete during this revolution isn't just important for grasping the politics of Germany, but in understanding the revising of Marxist principles and their subordination to the bourgeoisie as an international trend. This video will encompass the build-up to the revolution, without which it is impossible to grasp the underlying political forces that led to it, and that ultimately betrayed it. In fact, the betrayal had begun long before the start of the revolution. It's the story of the definite split between social democracy and communism, which would forever shape the socialist movement. movement. In the next part that I'll release within the next few days, we'll talk about the events of the German Revolution and how that split manifested. The content of this part is especially topical, since it enlightens the struggles within the so-called left about the correct Marxist position during imperialist aggression, considering the current war in Ukraine and the danger of escalation into a new world war. Everyone interested in ending capitalism, in Marxism or socialism must learn about this period. This video will be mainly based on these works. They have all their particular biases I don't agree with, so I have tried to synthesize all of those different perspectives while adding a bit of my own analysis. The German state is a fairly recent formation. For multiple centuries, Germany referred to a group of various German-speaking states in Central Europe. They were often very divided and subject to the influence of far greater empires. Most people in these states didn't identify as Germans, but as Prussians, Bavarians, or Saxons. Unlike in France or in other European states, Germany had not managed to overthrow the monarchy. In 1848, inspired by the revolutions in France and elsewhere, the masses in the German states attempted to do the same. One of their goals was to achieve unity. By the end of 1849, however, the revolts were crushed. The German bourgeoisie failed to unite the various German states, not just because it was weaker than France's, but under the threat of a strong proletarian movement, it preferred to ally itself with the monarchic forces. It's not the last time we would see this alliance against the working class in Germany. The structures of the monarchy persevered, but they adapted themselves to serve the needs of the quickly growing business class. Eventually, in 1871, unity was—
This is why, this is like the first iteration of the welfare state and the development of the welfare state in an effort to continue, I guess, under a monarchy, under a monarchical structure. There was there were like social benefits that basically gave life a extension to the continuation of the same exact structures that abuse the working class in an effort to retain the wealth in the hands of the few.
Was achieved at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, which had also sparked the creation of the Paris Commune, the first workers' state. Bourgeois historians often praised the prowess of Otto von Bismarck for achieving unity and for being the founder of the modern welfare state. But the unification into the German state manifested as a result of various complex developments. Unity served the needs of the rising bourgeoisie, and especially of the ruling classes in Prussia, who now dominated the newly formed federation.
This is why one analysis, I mean, I wouldn't even say one analysis, but like a direct analysis of like welfare capitalism is from a Marxist perspective is that welfare capitalism is a nefarious way in which you marginally improve working class conditions in an effort to not starve them to a degree that they rise up and destroy the capitalist mode of production. And there is truth to that matter. I mean, it's without welfare reforms, the idea is that capitalism is crushed under the weight of its own contradictions.
Prussia containing more than half of the population and most of natural resources. And the establishment of a welfare state wasn't simply out of a concern for the working class. Prussia's king was now also the German emperor, which was Wilhelm I of Prussia, from the imperial house of Hohenzollern. The other states had their own kings or grand dukes. Each state had their own version of governance, with Württemberg even adopting universal suffrage. The imperial government was responsible for policy regarding the whole country, such as the navy, commerce, and foreign relations. The emperor delegated those matters to the imperial chancellor, which was Otto von Bismarck. The chancellor title is still in use in Germany for the head of government today. This unified German state now quickly transformed itself into the second greatest industrial power in the world, even overtaking Great Britain, and thus creating a large working class within a short period of time. Concessions were made to the petty bourgeoisie and some minor ones to the working class, both as a byproduct and political convenience of the rising German capitalism. But the state continued to be ruled by the Prussian landowning aristocracy, the so-called Junkers, of which Otto von Bismarck was the most prominent. These ruling classes weren't subject to the Reichstag, the empire's parliament, chosen by male suffrage and with little to no actual power, and which ultimately answered to the emperor. Most of the liberal middle classes had been won over by the monarchist National Liberal Party. Bismarck had used the interests of the bourgeoisie to advance German industry and the interests of the upper middle classes to consolidate the new bourgeois hierarchy. Those concessions were not irrelevant. Within the first 10 years, life expectancy rose by over 10 years, and 12-hour working days became 10-hour days. Otto von You can also look at like somewhat,
you can find similarities within another. I mean, I'm not talking about Bismarck here, but like obviously fascists in America, capital owning fascists in America, like Henry Ford, also recognize the many benefits and the improvements in productivity that he would see out of his workers when he streamlined some of these processes in his own factories as well. So the irony, of course, is that like the consistent rent seeking and consistent profit maxing attitude that our capital owners have now actually leads to less productive results down the line. So even now, if we were to have more benefits in the direction of a true social democracy in the United States of America, we could actually legitimately improve productivity, but it's not even a thing that people consider nowadays because of short-term thinking.
Bismarck established the first welfare state in modern industrial society. The main goal was to gain working class support by directing it away from the rapidly growing socialist opposition. Social democracy today refers to something entirely different than what it used to in the 19th century. People of the revolutionary left used to call themselves social democrats, such as Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht of Germany, or Vladimir Lenin. The Bolsheviks were part of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which was firmly based on the theories of Marx and Engels. The biggest social democratic party at the time was the Social Democratic Party of Germany, or the SPD. Lenin, up until the beginning of the 20th century, praised the SPD as the most advanced social democratic organization, saying that German social democracy, quote, had always upheld the revolutionary standpoint in Marxism. The change in the meaning of social democracy roughly went like this. First, it meant Marxism. Then, it meant socialism, but through
Desperate for pussy voice. Desperate for pussy voice, Lenin. Social democracy in Germany is really cool. I love Rosa.
Reform, not revolution. And today it means capitalism with stronger social safety nets, or the so-called Nordic model, what they have in Sweden, for instance. In order to understand how this shift in definition happened, it is essential to learn about the history of the SPD and the German Revolution. In the period before the German unification, German social democracy was split into two currents. There were the Lassallians, who followed the teachings of the more reformist Ferdinand Lassalle, and the so-called Eisenachers, who claimed to uphold the teachings of Marx and Engels. The two most prominent Eisenachers were August Bebel and Wilhelm Liebknecht. They were the leaders of the Social Democratic Workers' Party of Germany, the SDAP, founded in 1869 in the German town Eisenach, hence the label Eisenachers. The two groups were very divided. When Bebel and Liebknecht refused to vote for war credits for the war against France in 1870, the Lassallians suggested they should be jailed for their opposition to the war. However, a few years later, after the unification had happened, members of the two groups urged the unification of German social democracy. In 1875, in the German city Gotha, the two factions managed to come together by adopting the Gotha program, the party platform of the SPD. At the time, Marx and Engels were heavy influences on the party leadership. They had become the most influential intellectual leaders of the socialist movement. Wilhelm Liebknecht, for instance, had developed a strong friendship with Marx and collaborated with him throughout his life. Marx and Engels weren't big fans of the Gotha program, however. Marx wrote the Critique of the Gotha program and sent it to the leadership of the SDAP. The program was criticized for its concessions to the Lassallian current, such as reformist deviations from revolutionary Marxist theory or the faulty analysis of German society, among other things. The document is now part of the Marxist classics. It discusses the importance of proletarian internationalism or the dictatorship of the proletariat. There are still many attempts to separate those two concepts from Marxist theory today. Although not entirely united in ideology and overall tactics, the party grew very quickly. A mere 2 years later, the party boasted close to 500,000 votes, which was over 9% of the total. The SPD became involved in nearly all aspects of society. It established countless trade unions, cooperatives, youth and women's organizations, or newspapers. The SPD was by far the biggest working class organization worldwide. Lenin said about the German working class that for almost half a century, it was, quote, the model of socialist organization for the whole world. German social democracy became a way of life, being involved not just during labor struggles and elections, but in people's leisure time. They established and became affiliated with chess clubs, a swimming association, the Free Sailing Union, cyclist magazines, music.
See, it fell apart because of their, this is a bourgeois moral failing right here. It's called fun time, and fun time should not be allowed. Their fun time should have been reading, like these guys are doing, but like reading more communist literature, theory. Sailing, it seems like bourgeois interest to me. Being a communist and being a socialist implies that you cannot have fun. Okay, fun is not allowed. Fun time is bourgeois decadence. You must always be angry. You must always be seeking to improve the material conditions of the working class, uplift the working class. If you are having fun, that means you are not fighting the revolutionary fight. You are actually a counter-revolutionary.
And singing groups, libraries, and even a free people's theater to spread class consciousness and critiquing the status quo through drama. Lenin wrote enthusiastically about these organizations. These leisure time organizations were important for another reason. In 1878, Otto von Bismarck managed to institute laws restricting the rapid development of the workers' movement. Hence, more indirect and clandestine forms of organization and propaganda became important. Within the first year of enacting these so-called anti-socialist laws, the Imperial German government outlawed about 250 associations, as well as close to 200 periodicals and over 300 non-periodical newspapers or magazines. This crackdown did not significantly slow down the socialist movement, however. Through a kind of Barbara Streisand effect, it even led to an increased membership long-term and raised class consciousness by making it apparent that the state viewed the socialist movement as a threat. So, many party activists reacted to state persecution by embracing Marxist revolutionary principles. In the 1880s, the party had reaffirmed that it was revolutionary.
It is a legit tactic to use treats to distract people, though, but I get what you mean. Dude, treats are great. That's the whole reason for why you want some kind of change to the current existing organization of the economy so you can have fucking treats and free time. That's the whole point. That's that is literally why I care about these sorts of things, because I want everyone to have the amenities and the fun and the free time. And so did Marx, really. This is why the idea that like socialism is actually a deeply collectivist ideology that has no basis in like individual freedoms is a inherently reactionary bastardization of why people want socialism to happen. The entire point is so that people can have fun, people can have treats, people can have luxuries, people can have whatever they wish to have,
with no illusions in parliamentary methods. However, although repression failed to destroy social democracy, it did lead a great part of the party toward a more moderate direction and opportunism. Since the laws didn't outlaw participating in the electoral theater while hurting the most radical and visible activists. August Bebel wrote in a letter to Liebknecht that a position in the Reichstag, quote, satisfies their ambition and their vanity. With great self-complacency, they look upon themselves as among the chosen of the nation and find immense pleasure in the parliamentary comedy. They take it very seriously. This had a great effect on the party membership. Revolutionary theory was only marginally connected with most of what the party actually did. Another factor adding to the complacency of many social democrats was the success and the...
Yeah, but prioritizing fun is unhelpful. That's how liberalism happens. You have to be joking. You cannot be serious right now. I don't believe that you're being serious. I'm going to assume that you're joking.
Relative stability of emerging German capitalism and minor concessions to the working class. Although behind many of these achievements was the working class struggle, not parliamentary activity.
Guys, stop saying Rust, all this stuff, okay? I'm gonna get into Rust when my team is ready, okay? None of them are ready right now. What do you want me to do? Do it on my own? No, I'm waiting for my fucking team.
What was crucial was...
I'm gonna eat, we're gonna watch this, and then I'm gonna play Rust.
That capitalism had entered a new stage at the turn of the century, its highest and last stage according to Lenin, imperialism. In addition to the profits appropriated in their own countries, the monopoly capitalists now increasingly appropriated so-called super profits from the colonies and semi-colonies. Capitalists in the imperialist countries could now use those extra profits to, quote, bribe, unquote, the working classes in their own states, leading to higher wages for a section of the working class, which came to be called the labor aristocracy. For instance, well-paid managers, bankers, or engineers. Though still part of the working class, many of these people see themselves as superior in social status, weakening class solidarity. It is this social stratum, Lenin says, that became the basis of various social democratic parties in Europe. He wrote, quote, "This stratum of workers turned bourgeois, or the labor aristocracy, who are quite Philistine in their mode of life, in the size of their earnings and in their entire outlook, is the principal prop of the Second International, and in our days the principal social prop of the bourgeoisie. For they are the real agents of the bourgeoisie and the working class movement, the labor lieutenants of the capitalist class, real vehicles of reformism and chauvinism. In the civil war between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, they inevitably, and in no small numbers, take the side of the bourgeoisie." This was also reflected in the composition of party leadership that became increasingly dominated by so-called high-skilled professionals or small business owners. This and the relative peace in Europe nourished complacency.
Would you characterize the HVAC business owners as labor aristocracy? No. HVAC business owners would be firmly petty bourgeoisie. Small business owners are in the petty bourgeoisie camp. They are capital owners. Their earnings are obviously marginal in comparison to big business, but ultimately they themselves still hire labor. They are a part. Sometimes they literally work as well. In many instances, they work as well, but they are petite, tiny, small business owners. But their revenue growth and their wealth relies on still relies on hiring other workers. So ultimately, they are still very much aligned in class interests with larger business owners. Labor aristocrats, on the other hand, would be the professional managerial class, doctors, engineers, lawyers, and the like.
And the belief that maybe incrementalism was the way forward. However, we need to keep in mind that higher wages under capitalism does not mean lower exploitation. Shorter working hours usually go along with higher intensity of work under capitalism. The progress in productivity meant that wages could be improved in absolute terms, but in relative terms, exploitation increased. This means that while wages increased a little bit, they didn't keep up with the increased productivity, which overwhelmingly benefited the income of capitalists. As one economic historian explains, the, quote, "relative income of the workers in 1914 was only about 1/3 of what it was in 1860. The rich had become enormously richer and the national wealth of Germany had grown, but the workers' share in this wealth had declined rapidly. The relative deterioration of the workers had proceeded at a speed probably unsurpassed in any country in Europe. But it takes political consciousness to understand this. The great majority could obviously be fooled by the dominant narrative, just like today. Many radicals who came back to Germany from their fleeing from the anti-socialist laws had lost their revolutionary fervor. And one of them,
your average defense attorney that does like family law or criminal law for people who do not make that much, just throwing that out there. Okay, one thing to remember is that like Engels is directly a factory owner. Okay, it doesn't change the dynamic in his advocacy in any meaningful capacity. You can literally be in certain instances a capital owner and still be very foundationally important in expressing revolutionary sentiment. Just like the labor aristocracy does not necessarily mean that you are going to, if you're a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, doesn't mean that you are going to ultimately align with the interests of the capital owning class. Okay? It doesn't work that way at all. A lot of people immediately think like, "Whoa, what the fuck? This is call out." It's not as black and white.
Was Eduard Bernstein.
Castro was the owner of a sugar farm? Yes. Fidel Castro unironically used the military, just like everywhere else, to seize whatever the land allotment was that went beyond what the government at the time decided. I forget what the exact number is. It was like a certain number of acreage. Once you went beyond it, that meant that it would be expropriated. Castro himself literally sent his own the military to his own family's sugar farm. He expropriated land from his own family.
In 1891, the SPD adopted the Erfurt program in the German city Erfurt. It was formulated by August Bebel and two gentlemen named Karl Kautsky and the aforementioned Eduard Bernstein. Engels, who, after Marx's death in 1883, was now the chief authority on Marxism, criticized this program for its non-Marxist, opportunist view on the state. He wrote, quote, "The political demands of the draft have one great fault. It lacks precisely what should have been said. What was missing was the necessity of the dictatorship of the proletariat and a few other Marxist components. In order to understand Engels' criticism and the development of social democracy in general, it is important to learn about Eduard Bernstein. He was born in 1850 and had been in close connection to Marx and Engels. He became a central figure in the SPD, but he gained prominence by becoming known as the first major revisionist. Revisionism, simply put, means revising Marxist principles. It usually means to update them toward a liberal direction, for instance, making concessions to the capitalist class or collaborating with it, turning it from something revolutionary to something less combative. The relative stability of capitalism led Bernstein to believe that maybe the contradictions of capitalism wouldn't sharpen as Marx had analyzed. He also questioned the philosophical underpinnings of Marxism, dialectical materialism. He posed that socialism was not the dialectical solution of these contradictions, but it is a result of the free choice of people, that is, independent from their economic and social situation. It is more of a moral option instead of a social necessity, so to speak. His conclusion was that rather than aiming for revolution, the working class should be focused on reforms. It should sink itself into the bourgeoisie and incrementally change the system from within. His approach is most prominently reflected in his quote, "The ultimate aim of socialism is nothing, but the movement is everything." He was heavily criticized, most prominently by Rosa Luxemburg, the leading figure of the left line, who wrote the pamphlet Reform or Revolution. In it she says that the dilemma between reform and revolution is meaningless, because reforms should be in the service of revolution. Her arguments were convincing. By 1903, the debate appeared settled in the Dresden Congress.
I 100% agree with Rosa Luxemburg. All matter of reform should be in the revolutionary direction. That ultimately, reforms are not an end, but a means to a more just end.
In which the majority of the party formally rejected Bernstein's revisionism. Another prominent SPD.
This still does not mean that you do not participate in an unjust system. I think people misunderstand a lot of this, where they personally, this is the difference between a lot of people who come in here and they're like, Hasan, when will you give up on bourgeois democracy? Blah, blah, blah. Like electoralism. No, thank you. Or people that fucking cast aside the likes of Bernie Sanders, or people that fucking constantly shit on any and every left-wing Democrat, hyper-focusing on them instead of the broader picture, instead of those who are truly working actively to harm the working class. Okay? It's silly for me in particular. I don't personally understand it because for me, I look at the immediate material conditions. I look at where class awareness is in this country, in the United States of America. I recognize America's placement on the planet as a hegemonic superpower that that is working actively to continue unequal exchange from the global South, to continue destroying and continue fomenting reactionary sentiment everywhere and anywhere it can, having its tentacles in every fucking aspect of global development. The idea that you can just like magically accelerate and not succumb to a fascist movement is silly. As literal socio-dem talk, Lamau. Well, I don't have an issue with social democrats in America, especially as long as they are not leaning in the direction of liberalism. A foundational social democratic principle would be literally fucking offering some kind of universal health care for all members of American society unconditionally. We don't even have that in America, okay? The notion that you would just like immediately jump multiple steps and be like revolution now is idiotic. It doesn't work that way.
The member who criticized Bernstein was Karl Kautsky. He was born in 1854, and after the passing of Engels in 1895, now he was regarded as one of the, if not the most prestigious Marxist theoretician. He was called by many people the Pope of Marxism. Until the outbreak of World War I, Vladimir Lenin, despite many differences, regarded Kautsky as the final authority on Marxism. But for Kautsky, revolution became something that had shifted to an indefinite future. Kautsky was part of the party center, which meant that he was against Bernstein's revisionism, but also against the tactics of the left, such as when Luxemburg argued to push for mass strikes against the state after the strike wave of the early 20th century. It was the Pope of Marxism who criticized her. And it was this party center, being in seemingly equal distance from the right revisionism and the revolutionary left, that played a key role in conceding more and more to the right under the guise of not in.
Lenin literally acknowledged her analysis on reform in liberal democracies in Europe. People don't get this. People just act as if she means electoralism is the end-all be-all. It's not. She emphasizes the revolutionary Marxist party should be participants in bourgeois electoral process to instill revolutionary principles.
Endangering party unity. However, for those not fully aware of inner party struggles, German social democracy still seemed to be committed to socialist revolution. In the meantime, the day-to-day practice of the SPD was fully committed to non-revolutionary activities. The defeat in the general elections of 1907 convinced the leaders that it was the extreme left and their revolutionary phraseology that was responsible for their loss in support, a charge reminiscent of today's liberal parties. One of the core issues of that campaign was the German colonization of Southwest Africa. A large part of the party leadership came quite close to the politics of the growing pro-monarchist parties, with some even using Marxist terminology to justify national defense and even colonialism. Also reminds us of many supposed Marxists today. The right line came to increasingly dominate the social democratic organizations, especially when it came to the responsibilities in fields such as finance, the newspapers, trade union leadership, and the running of election campaigns. This was reflected in the composition of party membership, which came to be increasingly dominated by proprietors of small businesses. In 1907, less than 15% of the membership was composed of those who fell under the label worker. In 1911, about 50% of the members were represented by only 27% of delegates. There was an increasing discrepancy between the leaders and the led, with the petty bourgeois section disproportionately being part of the leadership. This rightward shift culminated when Friedrich Ebert, leader of this right line, became party secretary in 1906 at the age of 36, and after the passing of August Bebel, became the chairman of the party in 1913. Ebert was known as an efficient organizer, intensely practical and cold. He would soon prove to be the chief ally of the bourgeoisie. History mainly remembers two names of the communist movement in this time in Germany. Those are Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, courageous fighters for the working class who were to be murdered in the same January night in 1919. But in truth, those two merely represented a whole revolutionary current rapidly growing in Germany, little by little separating itself from the SPD. Born into the party in 1871 as the son of Wilhelm Liebknecht, one of the party's founders, Karl Liebknecht was to become known to many as the personification of German Bolshevism. The lawyer was imprisoned for 18 months under the charge of high treason in 1907 after publishing his popular pamphlet Militarism and Anti-Militarism, which made him the boogeyman of the German nationalists and a hero of the socialist struggle. The SPD leadership looked at
Yes, I'm gonna do Rust today. I'm gonna do Rust today. I'm gonna do Rust today. It's literally pinned. It is also in my fucking title. What is wrong with everyone? Please. This is why I tell you all the time, like, just simply putting this stuff everywhere, plastering it everywhere, doesn't change the reality that people still unironically would just come in here and be like, when are you going to do, are you going to do Rust today? I don't really understand. I don't really understand. When are you going to play Rust? Okay.
Liebknecht with condescension. They saw him as a loud child who cannot be controlled. People described Liebknecht as passionate, impulsive, and courageous. Known as a great speaker and agitator rather than a distinguished theoretician or organizer, he was soon to meet a situation big enough to match his powers. Clara Zetkin was another leading figure. A close friend of Rosa Luxemburg, she led the Socialist Women's Organization and was the editor of its paper Die Gleichheit, Equality. Franz Mehring was another prominent figure. He had been more moderate, but eventually broke from Kautsky in 1910 and drew closer to Luxemburg. He was one of the older left-wingers and was known for his clear-headed analyses. Mehring, Zetkin, Liebknecht, Luxemburg, and others would later form the Spartacus League, named after the famous leader of the slave revolt in the Roman Republic. The Spartacus League was not the only formation of the left. left. Another group, mainly based in the city of Bremen, was referred to as the Left Radicals and would later form the International Communists of Germany, or short, the IKD. Among this group of people were Johann Knief, the leading figure, worker-turned-journalist Paul Fröhlich, and an intellectual from Hamburg called Laufenberg. They were critical of the Spartakists for not fully breaking with the Social Democrats and forming a fully independent organization of revolutionaries. The International Communists of Germany and the Spartacus League would later merge into the Communist Party of Germany. Another group of people who were to play a great role in the German Revolution were the revolutionary shop stewards. Although not organized wholly as an autonomous group, it referred to a group of militant organizers from the powerful Berlin Metal Workers Union, which were soon to lead powerful strikes in Germany. Their leader, Richard Müller, said that their goal was to establish in Germany a council republic in the Russian style. However, none of these men caused so much respect and sometimes outright fear as a woman from Polish origin. Rosa Luxemburg was born in Poland, which was under the Russian Empire, and became a German citizen in 1897. Like Lenin and other socialists, she emigrated to Switzerland in 1888, as Switzerland was a popular refuge for socialist activists at the time. There she met Leo Jogiches, who was to become one of her closest allies as a close partner in the Spartacus League. Together they founded the Social Democracy of the Kingdom of Poland and Lithuania, and played a great part in Poland during the Russian Revolution of 1905, which got them several months in prison. However, she's mostly known for the role she played in German social democracy. In 1910, the most famous social democratic papers, Vorwärts and Die Neue Zeit, refused to publish her articles arguing for a mass strike. Franz Mehring and other left-wingers increasingly became subject of party censorship as well. Karl Kautsky, who was the founder and editor of Die Neue Zeit, was chiefly responsible for this. Already in 1895, Engels was angry at Kautsky and Bernstein for editing his introduction to an edition of The Class Struggles in France, written by Marx in 1850. They had edited it in a way that made it seem like he was a proponent of a peaceful path to socialism. From 1910, Mehring, Luxemburg, and Anton Pannekoek, an influential Dutch Marxist in Germany, finally broke with Kautsky completely. At the time, repudiating Kautsky was not an easy thing to do. Even Lenin, who would later drag Kautsky in his writings as a renegade and opportunist, didn't think it was a good idea at the time, calling Luxemburg's accusations against Kautsky an exaggeration. Amidst heatening imperialist pressures, Luxemburg was again prosecuted in 1913 after making an anti-militarist statement in a speech. She was known as an effective polemicist, orator, and a teacher. Lenin later called her an eagle. Although a great critic of the revisionist line, she still clung to being part of the social democratic organizations. Many Marxists would criticize her for not putting enough emphasis on independent leadership, clinging on being part of a mass party, even if that party leadership has an incorrect political line. Rosa Luxemburg was a great organizer and revolutionary. However, there was, according to Pierre Brouet, a great price to pay for her refusal and failure to organize into a cohesive, independent left force before the outbreak of World War I in 1914, the first global war, and a war which would change the socialist movement forever. More often than not, the story of World War I begins with the murder of Archduke Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, by Serbian teenager Gavrilo Princip, after which Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia and then suddenly drags all the superpowers into a global war. Of course, the real causes behind the war go much deeper. Among the most important ones was the increasing success of German capitalism, which caused trouble for its rivals. While weaker in terms of industry, Britain and France had vast empires which came into conflict with Germany's expansionist interests. They sought to protect their territories by allying with Tsarist Russia against Germany, who was allies with the decaying Turkish Empire and Austria-Hungary. These competing blocs caused increasing friction in Southeast Europe, Africa, or the Middle East.
Let's not get into that too much, you know what I mean? Let's not, I mean, that's neither here nor there, you know what I mean? It's just, it happens, you know, it happens.
Matter of time before these tensions would explode into a worldwide war. For Lenin, the First World War and its politics cannot be understood without grasping the underlying economic essence of imperialism. In one of the prefaces of Lenin's seminal Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, Lenin writes, quote, "The war of 1914 to 18 was imperialist, that is, an annexationist, predatory war of plunder on the part of both sides. It was a war for the division of the world, for the partition and repatriation of colonies and spheres of influence of finance, capital, etc. Proof of what was the true social, or rather the true class character of the war, is naturally to be found not in the diplomatic history of the war, but in an analysis of the objective position of the ruling classes in all the belligerent countries. And this summary proves that imperialist wars are absolutely inevitable under such an economic system, as long as private property and the means of production exists. The tens of millions of dead and maimed left by the war, a war to decide whether the British or German group of financial plunderers is to receive the most booty. The seeming stability of capitalism, so much praised and emphasized by the revisionists, turned into bloody class conflict and the most deadly war humanity had seen within days. The general mood in Germany at the outbreak of the war is typically portrayed with joy, enthusiasm, and lust for adventure. Women sprawling flowers over the marching soldiers. While partly true, more recent research has further revealed that this picture is a myth and does not quite represent the whole sentiment of the early days. In Berlin alone, there were 50,000 pro-war demonstrators against 100 to 200,000 anti-war protesters, which are often not mentioned. In fact, even before the outbreak of the war, huge masses, even among the more conservative ones, went to the streets to protest against the looming war.
Why do you love glazing the Ottomans so much, Hasan? Aren't you meant to be anti-imperialist? Because I love the Ottoman Empire, because under the Ottoman Empire, no one would see a 3-minute ad break because everyone would be subscribed to the top of the hour.
Supposed mass support for the war is among the reasons Social Democrats then and today try to justify the SPD voting for the Kaiser's war credits. On the 25th of July 1914, the party issued an anti-war statement, which read, "The class-conscious German proletariat raises a flaming protest against the machinations of the warmongers. Not a drop of any German soldier's blood must be sacrificed to the power hunger of the Austrian ruling clique, to the imperialist profiteer." A mere 10 days later, on August the 4th, the party declared it would be voting for the government's war credits. It proclaimed, "For our people and its peaceful development, much, if not everything, is at stake in the event of the victory of Russian despotism."
Just good thing Germany does not have that same militaristic smoke in the aftermath of World War II against Russian despotism again. And for the record, at the time, of course, we're talking pre-revolution. So obviously, not exactly the Russia that you know as the USSR. And the current state of Russian affairs also does not reflect any kind of socialist sentiment. Much to consider. Much to consider about how history repeats itself, but sometimes, I guess, not the good parts.
Our task is to ward off this danger, to safeguard the civilization and independence of our own country. We do not leave the fatherland in the lurch in the hour of danger. After the majority of the party had voted for the war, it adopted the policy of Burgfriedenspolitik, castle peace politics in English, a social truce, which means that for the time being, for the sake of the fatherland, the party and the affiliated unions would not criticize the government or call for strikes. This term is still in use today in German-speaking countries to refer to class collaborationism of social democratic parties or other nominally left organizations. It was not until months later, against the pressure of the entire ruling class and the public opinion it dominated, amid a climate when any opposition to the war would earn you accusations of treason and allegiance to Tsarist Russia, when Karl Liebknecht defied party discipline and proclaimed in public his opposition to the war by voting as the only social democrat in the Reichstag against the war credits on December 2nd. He spoke, quote, "I am voting against the war credits bill today for the following reasons. This war, which none of the peoples involved desired, was not started for the benefit of the German or of any other people. It is an imperialist war, a war for capitalist domination of the world markets and for the political domination of the important countries in the interests of industrial and financial capitalism. The slogan against Tsarism is being used, just as the French and British slogan against militarism, to mobilize the noble sentiments, the revolutionary traditions and the hopes of the people for the national hatred of other peoples." This show of courage would make Liebknecht one of the symbols of the anti-war movement. He gave the anti-war voices a platform.
Classic. It seems like you want Russian barbarism to take root in the entirety of beautiful Europe, which is so much better than that sort of disgusting orc-like behavior. Wow. You want a ceasefire, dude? It's appeasement, literally.
platform around which war opponents could rally and feel supported by at least some force within politics. Other prominent members of the revolutionary left voiced their opposition to the war, such as Luxemburg, Clara Zetkin, and Franz Mehring. Several SPD members were purged from their positions after showing opposition to the war. Luxemburg soon landed in prison. Liebknecht was conscripted to the war despite being older than 40, and then later landed in prison as well. The general mood changed soon, however. Soldiers came back with stories about the war's horrors. Enthusiasm for the war began to wane. Anti-war protests increased rapidly. The SPD could have easily made use of this energy to take a critical stand against the war which was dragging on and on. All pretense about self-defense became empty and laughable. By now it was clear to most that the German Empire was aiming at expanding its power. At the start of the war, state and military leaders of the belligerent powers estimated the war would be over within months. The first German Chief of Staff, Schlieffen, said that a long war was inconceivable. As the armies got bogged down in the trenches, it wasn't only the soldiers that had to suffer and die for their imperialists. The whole economy needed to be milked to run the war machine. Living standards were hit immediately. Food supply crashed due to people from agriculture being conscripted or because of the blockade. The caloric value of the weekly diet fell to half of what a person needed on average to survive. People worked within a war economy, with mass production ramping up, bringing suffering workers closer together. So while the war crushed many links of organized labor, in a way it created conditions for more explosive organization. On May 1st, Karl Liebknecht addressed the May Day rally by shouting, "Down with the war, down with the government," before being taken into custody and receiving a 4-year sentence, landing again in prison. The 1 million strong SPD was the dominant power contesting the Prussian state for legitimacy. It was the time to mobilize the masses against the state. But to the revolutionary left, it was clear that German social democracy had abandoned Marxism long ago. Lenin called the actions of the SPD a sheer betrayal of socialism. It's not that the party could have prevented the war by adopting other positions. It was their abandoning of the class stand to be on the side of the working class in the face of imperialist war. The workers' parties did not oppose the government's criminal conduct, but called upon the working class to identify its position with that of the imperialist governments. The leaders of the International committed an act of treachery against socialism by voting for war credits, by reiterating the chauvinist slogans of the bourgeoisie of their own countries, by justifying and defending the war by joining the bourgeois governments of the belligerent countries, and so on and so forth. The responsibility for thus disgracing socialism falls primarily on the German Social Democrats, who were the strongest and most influential party in the Second International. The Second International was an organization of various socialist parties around the world. Before the outbreak of the World War in 1912, after tensions were increasing everywhere, leading already to the Balkan Wars or the Italo-Turkish War, the Second International agreed on a declaration in the Swiss city of Basel, basing itself on 2 famous paragraphs of the earlier Stuttgart.
They're looking at this entirely wrong. Thinking about a potential future where socialism won in Germany, when in fact they should have implemented socialism immediately in Turkey, in the Ottoman Empire, and instead of having a bourgeois, liberal, post-colonial state, the Turkish Republic, they could have had a socialist state. And then Turkey wouldn't be a part of NATO. The world would be the socialist Ottoman Republic. Would have completely dismantled the bourgeois capitalist interests.
Resolution, which were mostly the work of Rosa Luxemburg and Vladimir Lenin, it stated, quote, "If war is declared, the working classes in the countries affected, as well as their parliamentary representatives, have the duty to mobilize their forces to prevent hostilities from breaking out, with the support of the coordinating activity of the International Bureau, by applying those means which will seem the most effective to them, means which evidently will vary according to the more or less aggravated turn which the class struggle may take, and in relation to the general political situation. If, in spite of their efforts, war should break out, their duty is to struggle actively for a speedy end to the fighting, and to make every effort to use the economic and political crisis which the war causes to rouse the people, and in this way to speed up the abolition of the rule of the capitalist class." The breaking of most European socialist parties with this resolution had a far-reaching historical significance. According to Lenin, quote,
"Why didn't the Turkish socialism timeline happen? 1, bourgeois revolution. 2, NATO. American involvement. Turkey's geopolitical position created a phenomenal opportunity for it to be a direct military base against the USSR. That's where the Cuban Missile Crisis started as well. We had our own version of Gladio happening in Turkey at the time, where America went in, took like some of the worst, most hyper-nationalist, the ultra-nationalist fascists in Turkey, and beefed them up, offered them support. They spent every waking moment killing commies in Turkey and destroying any kind of left sentiment.
This collapse has been mainly caused by the actual prevalence in it of petty bourgeois opportunism, the bourgeois nature and the danger of which have long been indicated by the finest representatives of the revolutionary proletariat of all countries. This opportunism was evident before the outbreak of the war through the emphasis on the legalist, reformist and parliamentary approach and class collaboration. The backing of the imperialist efforts was only the crowning of this trend towards resignation and compromise with the capitalists.
Yeah, the term deep state was invented in Turkey, derin devlet. Like, literally. It is a term that originates from Turkish terminology.
System. Quote, opportunism was engendered in the course of decades by these special features in the period of the development of capitalism, when the comparatively peaceful and cultured life of a stratum of privileged workmen bourgeoisified them, gave them crumbs from the table of their national capitalists, and isolated them from the suffering, misery, and revolutionary temper of the impoverished and ruined masses. The imperialist war is the direct continuation and culmination of this state of affairs, because this is a war for the privileges of the great power nations, for the repartition of colonies and domination over other nations. Lenin said that this World War was the beginning of a new epoch, in which the aim of the working class was to struggle for power. Quote, the conversion of the present imperialist war into a civil war is the only correct proletarian slogan, one that follows from the experience of the Paris Commune and outlined in the Basel Resolution. It has been dictated by all the conditions of an imperialist war between highly developed bourgeois countries. One must be blind not to see bourgeois and petty bourgeois influence on the proletariat as the main and fundamental cause of the International's disgrace and collapse in 1914. Lenin was accused.
You have a lot of influence over the Western left. Do you plan on facilitating another communist international, or do you see another approach? Yeah. You're right, man. I'm going to do another international. Dude, take off the fucking horse blinders. I'm literally a Twitch streamer, okay? That is the most nutty thing I've ever heard. Oh my God. That's awesome. Oh.
Of causing the schism in the socialist movement. But from Lenin's point of view, it was not him and the other Bolsheviks trying to split the left by defending Marxism and rejecting liberalism. It was the opportunists who reject Marxism and defend liberalism. This is a common narrative that is still deployed against revolutionaries, that they are dogmatists, or that they are not pragmatic by clinging on to principles. Well, if you look at the SPD today, or other examples of revisionism, which are fully immersed in the imperialist system, you see that Marxists might have very good reasons to struggle for the correct political positions. There was another narrative that was put forward to defeat and even co-opt the Marxist standpoint. As the proletarian internationalist and the class struggle perspective grew, the ruling classes of Germany sought to combat it with the probably most effective bourgeois counter-narrative, nationalism. The goal was to reconcile the working class with the German Reich, to dilute class struggle by putting all members of a nation in the same team. Prominent apostles such as
and that shit worked real fucking good.
Stöcker sought to
this day
integrate the idea of the proletariat as part of the national community. Friedrich Naumann, a racist pastor and liberal politician, who later co-founded the German Democratic Party, sought to combine non-Marxist socialism with nationalism and liberalism, proposing social reform as a means to prevent class struggle. And of course, we know who later picked up the idea of National Socialism and how nationalism served to dilute the class struggle perspective then as well. But this will be the topic of another video that is coming soon.
This is why MAGA communism is a laughable concept in general. Like any kind of Nazbol sentiment, any kind of like national Bolshevism, any kind of sentiment that like brings nationalism into the equation immediately destroys any revolutionary aspect in the direction of socialism. You just can't do that. That's not a real thing. Okay? It's not. It is inherently reactionary. It's inherently counterproductive. It is inherently oxymoronic. It's just it's not dialectical. It's not materialist. It's not, well, I wouldn't say it's not dialectical. I guess it's not materialist at all. The concept of a nation state and nationalism as an extension of that concept is inherently not materialist. It's completely spiritual. It's ideological. You just made it up. You're like, oh yeah, me and all my neighbors, like we all, the people living in this fucking plot of land that we designed as a state are all, we're all united on our own values, on our own principles, on our shared principles. Is yet another way to mystify class struggle. In America, we don't really do it that much because I fear that we have better mechanisms of control. But anyway, let's continue.
In fact, already at this point, anti-Semitism as well served as a means to direct the anger of the petty bourgeoisie away from big capital, who was crushing it, to a supposed Jewish elite in control of working class organizations. August Bebel called this tendency the socialism of fools. But you can argue that the SPD was part of this nationalistic socialist trend as well, as they linked the well-being of the German working class to the success of German imperialism, not to the success of the international proletariat against the international bourgeoisie. You can see how at the time the word socialism was quite popular, so various movements used it opportunistically to draw in working class support. Unfortunately, this reactionary trend that claims socialism is still a phenomenon today. As the war dragged on, it became more and more obvious to everyone what the revolutionary left had already said at the beginning, that this war does not serve the people in any way. In December 1916, 20 SDP deputies voted along with Liebknecht against further war credits. Liebknecht was painted as a purist, an adventurist, an idealist at the outbreak of the war. Now, his stance was adopted by a larger and larger section of the SPD. Eventually, 40% of the socialist deputies opposed the war. However, as the Vorwärts pointed out, those who opposed the war represented more voters than the deputies who were pro-war, thus actually representing the majority. In January 1917, the SPD under Ebert expelled those who voted against the war, and these people went on to form the Independent Social Democratic Party, Unabhängige SPD in German, or USPD. The old SPD was now referred to as the Majority SPD, or MSPD. The USPD was a mixed group of different trends, united by their anti-war position. Among them were Eduard Bernstein and Karl Kautsky, who now opposed the war as well. They had supported it in the beginning. And members of the Spartacist group, such as Luxemburg and Liebknecht, who for the time being refused to split from this party, as mentioned before. There would soon ensue a world historic event that would massively boost and inspire the anti-war movement and accelerate the end of the imperialist slaughter. One of the chief revolutionary theorists who opposed working class support for the war and upheld the fight for socialism as the correct Marxist position went on to actually implement the Marxist ideas that the revolutionary left had argued for this whole time. Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks had seized power in St. Petersburg in November, or in October according to the old style of the calendar. Every German was soon to learn that the people from a country the German state represented as the quote, enemy number one, unquote, had been overthrown. Despite state censorship, the increasingly suffering and radicalizing working class had seen that revolution and an end to the war was possible. The German Minister for the Interior spoke of, quote, the intoxicating effect of the Russian Revolution. Social Democrat member of the Reichstag, Hugo Haase, warned the government, quote, does the Chancellor want the German masses to end up speaking Russian? Spartacist Fritz Heckert said, the German proletariat must draw the lessons of the Russian Revolution and take their own destiny in hand. This sentiment was reflected by the German working class, and the German state tried as hard as they could to defuse the explosive potential the October Revolution had brought with it. The argument of national defense made by the SPD sounded even emptier after the victory of the Bolsheviks. They could no longer claim that Russian tyranny presented a danger. The leadership of the USPD praised the revolution, quote, the working class has taken
which is infinitely scarier. In the eyes of the capital owners, this presented an infinitely scarier alternative because Tsarist Russia can be dealt with. You can use it as a perfect enemy. But all of a sudden, a better solution is possible. Holy shit. You don't want the fucking peasants to learn about that. You don't want the peasants to look at a country that can lead by example. It's terrifying.
Political power in Russia. This is an event of world significance. Never has the working class faced such an important task as this. 2 days later, in the same newspaper, it said, quote, "We, German workers, are with all our hearts with our Russian comrades in struggle in these days. They are also fighting for our cause. They are the vanguard of humanity, the vanguard of peace." In truth, however, the USPD was split on the new Soviet government. Most prominently, it was Bernstein and Kautsky that derided the revolution. Kautsky, who by now wasn't exactly close friends with Lenin, concluded that the revolution would end in chaos, and it is supposedly against democratic principles. Lenin prominently countered Kautsky's critique in the Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky. Quote, "The question of the dictatorship of the proletariat is a question of the relation of the proletarian state to the bourgeois state, of proletarian democracy to bourgeois democracy." One would think that this is as plain as a pikestaff, but Kautsky, like a schoolmaster who has become as dry as dust from quoting the same old textbooks on history, persistently turns his back on the 20th century and his face to the 18th century, and for the 100th time, in a number of paragraphs, in an incredibly tedious fashion, choose the old cud over the relation of bourgeois democracy to absolutism and medievalism. He wrote that his analysis is, quote, "such an awful theoretical muddle, such a complete renunciation of Marxism, that Kautsky, it must be confessed, has far excelled Bernstein." Lenin is criticizing Kautsky's misunderstanding of the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat, which emphasizes the class character of the state when compared to the liberal concept of democracy, which conceals it. It refers to workers, so the majority, being in power in contrast to the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the minority, what we have now. The Bolsheviks saw the Russian Revolution merely as the first stage of a worldwide revolution. The Soviet government used every means possible to spread it in all countries.
Remember, guys, America's so fucking foundationally busted that the majority here unironically complain about the tyranny of majority. The tyranny of majority is a principle that Americans genuinely think is bad. Without even a shred of examination, we simultaneously claim we love democracy and say we hate tyranny of majority. Brother, the tyranny of majority is democracy. Capitalism, or a capital liberal democracy, is a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Capital owners dictate what happens. A dictatorship of the proletariat, on the other hand, would be a democracy, a real democracy.
They even used the German-Russian peace negotiations at Brest-Litovsk on the 26th of November as a platform to spread the revolutionary message, and in particular to address the German workers and soldiers. Karl Liebknecht wrote from his prison cell, quote, "Thanks to the Russian delegates, Brest has become a revolutionary tribune. It has denounced the Central European powers, the lies and the hypocrisy of Germany. With the help of many social democrats, sympathizers of the October Revolution would spread thousands of leaflets in Germany to agitate for the revolution. The German military leaders exploited the Russian rush for peace and negotiated a peace settlement heavily in favor of the German Reich. The agitation for strikes and revolution by the Bolshevik delegation was heard, and on January 14th, a major strike broke out in Budapest and soon all over Austria and Hungary. It was estimated that 250,000 workers were on strike in Vienna alone, and thus began what historian Franz Borkenau at the time called, without exaggeration, quote, "the greatest revolutionary movement of properly proletarian origin which the modern world has."
When liberals now look back at the German Marxist movement at the time and the trade unionist movement at the time in general and say the commies went too far and that's why a lot of people were scared and aligned with the fascists, this is what they're talking about. they're talking about revolutionary sentiment being expressed, revolutionary action being engaged with, and how this created firm and committed opposition from the capital owners who saw fascism as a vehicle for stability, or rather the maintenance of the pre-existing hierarchies.
Scene. The Spartacus League put out leaflets saying, quote, "The Viennese workers elected councils on the Russian model," unquote, and proclaiming a general strike. About 500,000 workers went on strike all over Germany for several.
What is the correct response to that? I disagree with the premise of the tyranny of majority, but I don't know how to refute it. What do you mean? It's just called democracy. Do you like democracy? Americans think they like theoretical democracy. The question is, if there's no tyranny of majority, you know what you have? A tyranny of minority, which is what we currently have. A tyranny of minority is not a democracy at all, but instead something different, an oligarchy.
Days. Soldiers began to understand they didn't give their lives to defend Germany while the officers sat idle, sending them to their useless deaths. Sailors in northern Germany got organized and undertook various protest actions. The movement eventually failed under the violence of the military might, and its leaders were executed. The others received multiple years of hard labor each. The sailors had learned an important lesson: that you can take on the state's military machine with non-political peaceful protests. The main problem with the strikes was that there was no revolutionary organization guiding it towards revolutionary aims. Leo Jogiches wrote they, quote, "did not know what to do with the revolutionary energy. Most crucially, there was no independent revolutionary party to undermine the confusion intentionally caused by the right-wing Social Democrats to diffuse the anger of the masses. Nobody could, at that point, openly declare their opposition to the strike movement without losing credibility among the masses. So the liberal opportunists do what they can do best. They co-opt the movement and try to suffocate it from within. The USPD was definitely not that revolutionary.
Even like Black Lives Matter, which wasn't necessarily revolutionary, nor was it socialist, was susceptible to the similar co-optation which occurred under the Trump administration.
Organization. It was led mostly by centrists who tried to distance themselves from the Spartacist slogan, "The enemy is at home, peace through socialist revolution." They advised against mutiny or other seditious acts. The prominent SPD leaders declared their superficial support for the strike and managed to gain leading position in the action committees of the strike, against lots of opposition with one goal. As Friedrich Ebert later explained, quote, "I joined the strike leadership with the clear intention of bringing the strike to a speedy end to prevent damage to the country." His party colleague Schneiderman and future Chancellor of Germany said, quote, "If we had not joined the strike committee, law and order would not now exist here." The state knew very well who their enemy was and who wasn't. For instance, following a meeting that was banned by the state, left socialist Wilhelm Dittmann got a 4-year prison sentence while Ebert and co. were left untouched. Ebert said in a speech in that meeting, quote, "It is the duty of workers to back up their brothers and fathers at the front and to manufacture the best arms. Victory is the dearest goal of all Germans." The Social Democrats did their absolute best to de-radicalize the strike movement. They sought to mediate with the government, maintaining that the strikers had merely economic demands, not political ones, which of course wasn't true. The strike was eventually smashed. Jogiches summed it up as follows, quote, "Because they could not imagine the strike wave as more than a simple protest movement, the committee, under the influence of the Reichstag deputies, tried to enter into negotiations with the government, instead of refusing all negotiations and directing the energy of the masses." Only a few weeks after the German High Command had been talking about victory, it became clear to them that they were sure to lose after a failed offensive on the Western Front in the summer of 1918. They now acknowledged, after seeing the massive strikes and protests, that the whole country was about to collapse. The only way to ensure stability was to negotiate for peace immediately and to liberalize the government in order to prevent a total breakdown. The leadership of the Prussian military suggested to the Kaiser that there was no choice but to bring the SPD into the government. Secretary of State Hintze famously said, quote, "It is necessary to prevent an upheaval from below by a revolution from above." The MSPD was of course in full agreement with demanding the emperor's resignation. They wanted to gain the initiative over the revolutionaries whose support was rapidly growing.
No, I didn't say anything disparaging about Linux. I love Linux.
But the emperor refused and settled in the headquarters of the German army in Spa, in Belgium. The Kaiser's liberal-leaning cousin, Prince Max von Baden, was chosen as the chancellor, and concessions to the German workers were determined. Philipp Schneiderman of the SPD was among the politicians who were now let into the government and conduct the so-called October reforms to liberalize the government and negotiate a peace deal with US President Woodrow Wilson. All with one goal: to preserve the monarchy. Part of this maneuver was to be able to shift blame for the loss of the war on the Social Democrats in order to save any legitimacy that was left for the monarchy. Friedrich Ebert was of course totally okay with this. His ascension to state power was too close to refuse it. In a meeting of party leadership, he warned, quote, "If we don't come to some understanding with the bourgeois parties and the government, then we will have to let events take their own course. Then we will be resorting to revolutionary tactics." A similar development would take place to that experienced in Russia. Part of the concessions to the working class was the releasing of Karl Liebknecht from prison, but all those maneuvers were not enough to calm the anger of the masses and to defeat the specter of revolution. The High Command was frustrated in their efforts for an immediate peace. The French imperialists were determined to grab as much territory as possible, just as the Germans did with the Soviet Union a year earlier. In a desperate attempt to defend as many holdings as possible, the Germans sent out troops to fight lost battles. But the sailors understood that the leadership was to send them to unnecessary and certain death. One sailor told his father, quote, "We all felt this would be our last voyage, and so we instinctively refused to follow orders." And they did, and were immediately arrested. Thousands of sailors, joined by the port's workers, went out to protests at the arrests in Kiel. 9 were killed after clashes with government loyalists, but the movement had learned from their past mistakes and refused to protest peacefully, so they fired at the patrols and managed to force them to retreat. And thus began the German Revolution. Thank you for watching part 1. In the next part, we'll talk about and analyze the events of the German Revolution, including how Social Democrats crushed it with the help of proto-fascist forces, and we're gonna cover the murder of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. And we're gonna try to draw important lessons from this revolution for future organizing. So make sure to subscribe to not miss part 2, and I'll see you soon. Auf Wiedersehen.
Great video. I can't wait to watch the second part of it. I almost want to watch just like the foundation of like German paramilitaries, because it's very important. I mean, this establishes the basis of like how there's a reactionary heel turn from Social Democrats that inevitably sick their sights on what they consider to be much more threatening to the comfortable positions that they've created for themselves. The reason why I always stress this, like whenever people come in here and chirp about like the conditions that made way for Nazi Germany's rise, it is objectively ahistorical when people claim, like when people see the KPD and the German socialist movement and put the blame on them, liberals who choose to put the blame on the German socialist movement are ironically doing the same fucking, like they're revisiting the same kind of fascist capitulations that literally happened back then. So in a way they are saying like, no, as a liberal, I'm gonna turn into a Nazi soon. Like, you better fucking shut this down. It's so funny how a modern version of this sentiment is very much expressed, and we do laugh about it regularly. The whole like, oh, the left got too woke for me, so I fucking changed my entire worldview. You know what I mean? The left got too woke for me, which is why I no longer believe in like climate change. And actually personally think that like, you know, I decided I am a Nazi now.
Welcome back, and thank you for the amazing feedback on part 1, which you should check out if you want to fully understand the historical context of the betrayal of the German Revolution, since we look at the development of the important political forces, their representatives, and how those relate to the development of capitalism. So in case you are confused about some names that I use here, you'll likely find an introduction of those organizations or personalities in the first part. So, los geht's! After the refusal of the sailors to be sent to their certain death by the high command of the German Reich, the key...
Dude, if this guy fucking complains about the existence of the Marxist-Leninist vanguard, I literally, I'm gonna lose my fucking mind. Read more Lenin. He is not clear on it, on why he says it's necessary. Can you please explain why Lenin was a tyranny of the few, i.e. vanguard tyranny, please? Yes, dude, vanguard tyranny. Violence sometimes is a necessity to overthrow, and it was a necessity to overthrow the Tsar. Okay, that's it. There is no political system. There is no political system that does not have violence in it, whether it's structural violence or direct violence or state violence. Okay, I don't understand. I don't understand how you think that hugs and kisses are going to magically cause any kind of monarchy to perish. What is that chatter pro czar? No, he's probably fucking an infantile, disordered left com. That's it. That's what it is, most likely. No, through just like no disrespect to the Netzerei Karta, but just like the Messiah is going to magically give the Jews a nation state. He's going to come back, and capitalism is going to succumb to its own fucking. All the left-com groups are pro-Lenin. Okay. He's an anarchist. I don't know. I don't know what he is.
The uprising began on November 3rd, 1918.
He's an anarcho-syndicalist. I don't know. I don't know what he is.
It was the beginning of the end for the German monarchy. But there was something bigger at play here. It was the very stability of German capitalism. By now, the revolting workers and soldiers understood very well who they were sent to death for. According to a report that was sent to the naval headquarters, the sailors were singing, quote, "We struggle not for Germany's honor. We struggle only for millionaires." They were saluting another with "Long live Liebknecht." All attempts to suppress the Kiel uprising failed. The sailors disarmed their officers, armed themselves and raised the red flag on the ships and factories, freed their comrades from prison and occupied public buildings. Mass meetings composed of tens of thousands of people were held, and sailors and workers' councils were formed, just like they had formed before the October Revolution in Russia. On November 4th, Kiel belonged to the councils. An increasing number of soldiers and workers showed their solidarity and joined, with many sailors leaving Kiel and carrying the uprising to all parts of the country. Virtually every town in Germany followed a similar pattern like the one in Kiel. The councils became the authority in the towns. In Hamburg, the biggest city in the north, a workers' and soldiers' council formed, and Paul Fröhlich of the International Communists of Germany led a group of armed soldiers to take over the daily paper Hamburger Echo to create an outlet for the council named Rote Fahne, Red Flag in English, which proclaimed, quote, "This is the beginning of the German Revolution, of the World Revolution. Hail the most powerful action of the World Revolution. Long live socialism. Long live the German Workers' Republic. Long live World Bolshevism." Within a few days, all major cities of the German Reich were under the control of revolutionary workers and soldiers' councils. It is really quite incredible how, within a short time, a revolutionary situation can unfold this quickly all over a country, shattering all the theories of many self-proclaimed Marxists about the seeming stability of capitalism, and they're shifting the question of revolution far into an indefinite future. Quote, "There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen," Lenin said in 1917. Even in conservative Bavaria, soldiers joined with the workers to occupy all strategic points, such as railroads, telephone offices, or government agencies. On November 8th, the People's Republic of Bavaria was formed, thus ending the Bismarckian system. For a long time, bourgeois historians refused to call this immense upheaval a revolution. They referred to it as a chaotic period, a period of disorder and mutiny. But what had happened was in fact a real revolution. The very fabric of the social and economic system was shattered and replaced with something else. The masses embraced the councils over monarchic and bourgeois institutions. What are those councils exactly, and why are they so important for workers' power? Karl Marx had written about them in his analysis of the Paris Commune. Quote, "The Commune was formed of the municipal councillors, chosen by universal suffrage in the various wards of the town, responsible and revocable at short terms. The majority of its members were naturally working men, or acknowledged representatives of the working class. The Commune was to be a working, not a parliamentary body, executive and legislative at the same time. The councils were a more democratic alternative, not only to monarchy, but also to the parliamentary system. In contrast to bourgeois democracy, in which all economic power is in the hands of a small minority of capitalists, the councils were precisely an organ for democratic control of the economy by the workers themselves. They enabled millions of people to achieve an unprecedented degree of self-determination over their lives. Meanwhile, the Social Democrats were doing their best to ward off the revolution by pushing the Kaiser to abdicate. Friedrich Ebert told Prince Max, quote, "Unless the Kaiser abdicates, a revolution is inevitable. But I will have none of it. I hate it like sin." The revolution could no longer be defeated. It had to be stifled. But time was running out. People's power was being established everywhere. But the most important city had not fallen yet. In Berlin, the independent Social Democrats were arguing with the Spartakists and the revolutionary shop stewards about how to unleash the revolution in the most crucial city. The revolutionary left was in favor of a mass strike, but the meeting turned it down, chiefly by USPD leader Hugo Haase, who still believed in unity with the SPD. He smeared the Kiel uprising as an impulsive explosion. Berlin was the most crucial city, because it was here where state repression was strongest. The police crushed a meeting to celebrate the anniversary of the Russian Revolution on November 7th, and gained control of all important streets and public buildings. But Karl Liebknecht had...
I'm not even chewing my nails right now. Shut the fuck up. I'm using a toothpick. Jesus Christ, y'all are so fucking annoying. I will chew my nails as much as I want. Suck my dick.
Enough of the waiting and discussing with the cowardly USPD leaders, and issued a leaflet calling for revolution. He was supported by the revolutionary shop stewards, the Spartakists, and many USPD members, frustrated with the appeasement of...
Wait, we interrupt this broadcast because there's a new Abu Ubaidah statement released. Apparently, Hamas actually captured more IDF soldiers. Where is it? Do you have a link? I want to see it. Hamas is claiming that a significant ambush against the IDF in the tunnels under the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza involved the killing of IDF soldiers and seizing their gear, and also the capture of at least one Israeli soldier. I can't show you the video, obviously, because it's very fucking graphic. I can't tell if he's alive and is the Israeli soldier that they captured, or if it's one of the dead Israeli soldiers, but they're dragging a dude inside of a tunnel system, it seems. I can't say I have much sympathy for the IDF. No, I don't have any sympathy for the IDF. I'm simply relaying what they're saying they did. Isn't that a war crime? Wait, what? You think it's a war crime to capture an enemy combatant? What the fuck? No, it's literally, it's not. That's like, that unironically, that unironically is one of the things that is like totally permissible. The treatment of the prisoner can be a war crime depending on what you do with the prisoner, but taking a prisoner of war is not a... He's dead, isn't he? No, I think the person that they're dragging is alive. I just can't tell from the... I can't tell from the video if this is like the actual prisoner or if it's a dead person that they're dragging. Hamas and Israel both, however, do this thing where they will retrieve They will retrieve dead bodies as well. Both sides participate in this, and I don't know if that falls under desecration. I think it probably does, where they will capture dead bodies as well and use them as a bargaining chip as well. I'm pretty sure that would be. I'm certain that would fall under. That definitely falls under a war crime. It would constitute for desecration of a dead soldier. Concerned your chat is weirdly happy about taking a prisoner. I mean, it's a prisoner of war, and regardless of Hamas's domestic politics or anything like that, or fundamentalism or anything that they believe in, they are currently engaging in a defensive war against a genocidal state that is engaging in an offensive ethnic cleansing campaign. Capturing a soldier or killing a soldier in that regard is perfectly permissible and just, and literally is a better alternative to killing them, as a matter of fact. Prisoners of war have long often been considered a better means of dealing with conflict than actually killing prisoners, or rather killing soldiers when they're in the act of war, because that is a quicker way to draw the end of the conflict. It's also a massive propaganda blow to what Israel has been trying to cultivate. Israel's been trying to claim that they have done a phenomenal job dealing with Hamas. Israel has been trying to claim that they have dealt with Hamas in the north, dealt with Hamas in the south. The only place where Hamas remains is actually simply Rafah. I just think we all know the IDF soldiers are going to get tortured. I wouldn't be so sure about that. However, yes, under detainment, every single Palestinian gets tortured in some way, shape, or form. But as far as we understand, every single hostage that has been taken, to the best of the ability of the resistance groups, have been defended, literally, including putting their own, like Hamas, Al-Qassam Brigade bodies above piles of mattresses in intense bombing campaigns in an effort to save the lives of the hostages. Remember, the rational choice in this circumstance is obviously to make sure that your bargaining chip doesn't perish. This is not to say that they value human life above all else or anything like that. If you do your very best, like if you literally put your life on the line specifically to take hostages, it would make no sense to, kill them. It would make no sense to actually deny them medical care. It is your only form of leverage. Prisoners of war also is the same. Abu Ubaidah just finished a speech saying at noon of Saturday they managed to ambush an IDF platoon north of Gaza in a tunnel, capturing and injuring the entire platoon. I doubt that they took over an entire platoon. I don't know. I don't know what happened. But the IDF is denying the abduction of the soldier. It says Volodymyr Zelensky. You might want to mention the Hamas on the mattresses thing came from a hostage testimony, so you can debunk clip chimps in real time. Yes, the Al-Qassam Brigade soldiers putting their bodies on top of mattresses in periods of intense IDF bombing is not something that Hamas claims. It's something that came directly from a hostage testimony, a hostage that was released that talked about the conditions as they were held hostage by Hamas. Anyway, in any case, taking a prisoner of war during an ethnic cleansing campaign the Al-Qassam brigades are engaging in defensive posture against an ethnic cleansing campaign is going to lead to a lot of political complications in Israel, which is precisely the reason why I suspect the Israeli government would immediately deny it. Because it's a massive blow to the confidence of the colonial entity in this regard. It is a massive blow to the public, to the collective conscience of Israelis that have only heard that the war efforts are, albeit a little tumultuous, still going pretty well. They're defeating Hamas left and right, rarely ever showcasing the atrocities on the ground in Gaza, while simultaneously taking ownership over the death toll, only to say that they have killed thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinian terrorists. Okay? It is humiliating. Al Jazeera Arabic claims multiple soldiers were taken captive in Jabalia ambush. Once again, we do not know the exact details yet. And we perhaps will not know the exact details for some time. Okay? It is going to take some time. Hasan, I find you so odd, though. Like, why say it like that? Say it like what? Hasan, you are the most shameless, evil, disgusting person on this platform. Someday you will pay for the lies and racism you spread on the internet. Please tell me this is an ad break debate and not genuinely an opinion that you hold. Please tell me it's bait. With a name like Bazinga 550, I suspect that you are just entirely too early to serve the serious. You think I'm the most shameless, evil, disgusting person on this platform. Someday, I will pay for the lies and racism I've spread on the internet. There are literal child pornographers and Nazis, like unabashed, shameless Nazi child pornographers. And you think I am the most racist, evil, disgusting person? You're an evil person and you know this, Hasan. First of all, no evil person thinks that they are evil. That's number one. So the idea that, like, even if I was an evil person, that I would acknowledge that as the truth would be ridiculous. Just in and of itself. Like, that's a ridiculous thing, a ridiculous assertion to make. But I would love to explore this just a little bit further and ask you why you think I am an evil person. Like, is there a tangible reason as to why you think I'm an evil person, or is it simply vibes-based that you arrived at such a serious conviction, a firmly held belief that you have? Tell me then why you hate white people so much. You think I'm the most evil person online because you think I hate white people? Brother, I'm white. Look at me. Look. Gaze into my Caucasian eyes. You do hate white people. I really hope that this was an elaborate ruse to serve the top of the hour ad break. I did. But I fear this is simply a lost soul. No, chatter, I do not hate white people. I do hate white supremacists, though. I am white myself. This chat is probably a kid Hasan. I don't think a kid has this much hatred in their heart. Do you... I have to ask you, Bazinga. Do you not recognize me as white? And if that is the case, you have to describe exactly what you think is white and how I do not fall under the category of white, while simultaneously maintaining the position that whiteness is not a socio-political construct, but instead that can change throughout time, but instead a firm, genetic, inalienable, unchangeable quality. Because the reality is you can't have both of those opinions at the same time. Therein lies the problem. I will be honest, I do not know if you are white. This chatter is not baiting for the top of the hour ad break, which is coming right now, by the way. And I do not care to be honest. You can be any race. Okay. Continue. Is this really the best D community? It's not. I don't even want to say. Is this one of the 5,000 bots from yesterday? I don't think so, even though he does present himself like a bot. Some of your biggest drama farmers made a new video about you and Frogan. They probably came from there. It's just, it is a little bit concerning that every new round of drama somehow leads to dumber and dumber arguments that these people present. It actually is shocking. Like, I did not... It's shocking only because I genuinely thought, like, oh, it can't get stupider than this. And then I sit there, corrected by history, It's just like, it is circling the drain, yes. The arguments get stupider and stupider and stupider. And I don't know how. Every single time I'm like, how will it get dumber? And then I'm shocked that an even dumber argument presents itself. This should be a cause for concern for many that frequent these communities. One should ask themselves, why are our arguments getting dumber and dumber by the minute? Perhaps some self-reflection is a necessity. When you succumb to reactionary thinking and you are simply motivated by spite, you have strong convictions that are not born out of any real disagreement, nothing tangible, you become no different than the very same reactionary conservative Republican Party defenders that you consider to be better than. Especially when you make arguments about how I hate white people. Concerning. Let's continue with the Betrayal of the German Revolution Part 2 by Bes D. Marx.
Approach of its leadership. The military high command were confident that any uprising in Berlin could be broken up by troops. But that confidence was short-lived, as more and more soldiers joined the revolting crowds carrying red flags. Liebknecht led a group of soldiers to seize the Imperial Palace and left independent Emil Eichhorn seized the police headquarters. On November 9th, 6 days after Kiel, the revolution had overtaken Berlin. The old ruling class was desperate, so Prince Max finally handed the chancellor position to Friedrich Ebert on November 9th. The SPD leadership tried its very best to show fake support to the uprising to slowly but surely suffocate it. For instance, their paper Vorwärts called for a general strike, 5 hours after it had already begun. Philipp Scheidemann was eating a meal in the Reichstag restaurant when deputies ran toward him, begging him to calm down the masses who were outside the Reichstag building. He also apparently learned that a few meters away, Liebknecht intended to proclaim a German Soviet Republic. He had to do something quickly to not hand the initiative to the revolutionaries. After he reluctantly went to the balcony, he looked at an angry crowd carrying rifles and red flags. He told them that the socialist Friedrich Ebert is now the chancellor, that socialism had won. But the crowd was still angry, so fearing that the Kaiser's abdication wasn't enough to calm the masses, he proclaimed, quote, "Long live the German Republic," and massive applause followed. Ebert wasn't happy at all with this move, yelling at him, quote, "You have no right to proclaim the Republic." Ebert didn't want the Republic, he wanted order, and he hoped for the monarchy to stay, even after Prince Max gave it up by abdicating. However, little would he know that Scheidemann had been just in time. A few meters away on the same November 9th, Karl Liebknecht, speaking at a rally in front of the Russian embassy, proclaimed the Republic himself. Quote, "Down with the Hohenzollerns, long live the Social Republic of Germany. The day of liberty has dawned. I proclaim the free socialist republic of all Germans. We extend our hand to them and ask them to complete the world revolution. Those of you who want the world revolution, raise your hands." And thousands of hands rose up. If the German Revolution's most prominent names are Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, the counter-revolution bears the name of Friedrich Ebert and Gustav Noske. Gustav Noske was a party functionary that had become a prominent deputy, an enemy of proletarian internationalism. He had declared at the Reichstag during World War II that socialists were not, quote, "vagabonds without a fatherland." He had tried to convince the bourgeois parties to give the German workers good reasons to become soldiers and thus give their lives in the imperialist slaughter. Noske declared himself a supporter of Oswald Spengler's proto.
This is also part of the reason why I, personally, as someone living in the United States of America, am very, very skeptical of those who unconditionally ride for American imperialism while masquerading as socialists themselves or as radical, progressive figures themselves, even if they don't use the term socialism. Okay? I do not take issue with people who categorize themselves as social democrats in general. Okay? But I do draw a red line when someone claims that they are pro-NATO and pro-American empire. Out of what? Out of fear that if America is not engaging in global dominance, then a much scarier foreign country will take America's place and engage in global dominance. And then we'll see, because they will do to us what we've done to them, but tenfold. This inherently is a reactionary ideology, one only born out of being comfortable in the position of global dominance. Okay? When you personally recognize that America is the hegemonic superpower, and you simultaneously like that position and claim that that is simply better, albeit marginally, but simply better than the possibility of some other scary country dominating the globe in the way that the United States of America dominates the globe, all of a sudden, you arrive at exactly this level, at exactly this kind of ideology. And before people say you are pro-NATO and pro-State Department regarding Ukraine, bro, you have demonstrated your inability to comprehend what I am stating in terms of Ukraine. Saying that Ukraine has a worthy cause of emancipation against an invading force does not mean that I am pro-NATO or pro-State Department regarding Ukraine. As a matter of fact, the reasons as to why I criticize the NATO, pro-NATO, and pro-State Department positions has led many, especially in this group of people, to declare me a pro-Russian simp, someone who is pro-Vladimir Putin, or someone who just hates America. The very same counter-revolutionary, the modern version of the counter-revolutionary groups that we are looking at right now are the very same people who consistently tell me that I am pro-Russia and I must hate America and I must leave America because I hate America. NATO Andy say you push Z. Z Andy say you are pro-NATO. How the fuck can you be pro-NATO and too pro-Russia at the same time? I am not and never will be pro-NATO. Nor am I pro-American State Department. If I was, I would love Vladimir Putin. I would hug and kiss him. Because his actions in Ukraine, both violent, were simultaneously a gift to the NATO admirals and the generals and the military-industrial complex. Vladimir Putin is also not a socialist at all. Vladimir Putin is a kleptocrat. He is an oligarch. He is a dictator who runs a right-wing, capitalist, oligarch kleptocracy. He is in no way, shape, or form a revolutionary figure. His interests in Ukraine are not born out of a revolutionary desire to liberate the Ukrainian working class. You have to be fucking insane to suspect that. Okay? You are one of the most outspoken anti-NATO leftist content creators out there, and have been for many years now. I know. The only aspect of the USSR that Vladimir Putin likes is an unprincipled understanding of the USSR as like a global superpower, maybe even an empire, which it was not, but that doesn't change the equation or the dynamic in the minds of those who are, you know, the Duginists and Putin himself.
fascist Prussian socialism. Hitler wrote about Noske in 1933, saying he is, quote, an oak among these social democratic plants. When the news of the Kiel uprising reached the imperial government, Prince Max sent a reliable social democrat to calm the revolutionary fervor, and that man was Gustav Noske. Aside from a few politically conscious workers, the majority of the revolting masses were still confused about the various currents and what differentiates them. Another consequence of not constituting the Communist Party at an earlier point. Yes, the majority Social Democrats had supported the war, but now they were seemingly on their side. Maybe they had acknowledged their mistakes. Many striking workers were not socialists, and they did not yet differentiate between the parties calling themselves socialist. Many of them did not believe, or rather did not want to believe, that the SPD leadership was determined to defend the old system. Hence, the councils were not exclusively made up of revolutionary socialists. For instance, German sociologist Max Weber was part of the Workers' Council of Heidelberg, and he was pleasantly surprised that most members there were moderate liberals. Nonetheless, people were radicalizing quickly, and that process had to be reversed. Noske, a cunning and talented politician, eventually managed to sway the people to his side. He was so successful in doing so that the crowds proclaimed him governor of Kiel. Noske promised to meet the most urgent demands of the workers and soldiers of Kiel, such as pardons of mutineers in return for a more calm atmosphere. The next day, Noske called Berlin, saying he, quote, had only one hope, a voluntary return to order under social democratic leadership. Then the rebellion would collapse. Noske slowly but surely restored authority of the former officers and the police, and Prince Max was full of admiration for what Noske had accomplished at Kiel. Quote, the man has done superhuman things. Prince Max later wrote in his memoirs, quote, the fate of Germany depended on Ebert repeating his party comrades' achievement on a large scale, that is, rolling back the movement throughout the country. Appeasement through minor concessions and false promises. This trick was to be successful in undermining countless working-class movements in the coming decades all over the world. At the time, very few anticipated the tragedy that was about to ensue. It is reasonable to assume that not even the ruling classes themselves were confident they could turn things around. In the 7 days after November the 3rd, revolution was a certainty for much of the working class. The German monarchy had collapsed, and there was no parliament with any claim to power. The only organs with any authority were the workers' and soldiers' councils, and the new government in power called itself socialist, so it is no surprise that many regarded the revolution as completed. Unfortunately, it wasn't. For a revolution to be completed, toppling the old order is not enough. Establishing a new one is the other, in many ways, even harder part. But the masses who had managed to take over city after city had no cohesive plan for what to do with that power. The revolution had been largely spontaneous. It had no centralized leadership, but the counter-revolution did. Now, the trick of Noske in Kiel had to be repeated in many other places, and most crucially in Berlin, where the revolutionary movement had arrived on November 9th. Time was running out. As the new chancellor of a non-existing government, Friedrich Ebert planned to, quote, steer the revolution into orderly channels and defend the rule of law from anarchy. But these maneuvers were not enough to defeat the Marxists, because the workers' and soldiers' councils were still the main authority throughout the German Reich. They had to be won over, and so it was crucial for the MSPD to build a coalition with the USPD to form an executive based on the councils. The independents themselves had not full control over the councils, and so it was in the interest of the USPD right wing to form unity with the MSPD. Hugo Hase was especially interested in social democratic unity because power was shifting quickly to the left wing of the independents, led by Georg Ledebour and the Spartakists. The two parties wanted to meet as quickly as possible, but because Hase wasn't in Berlin that day, and because Hase was so crucial for the MSPD, this decisive meeting was postponed to the next day on November 10th.
Hasan, read this. I feel like you are caught playing a role without actually seeing what you're looking at. You've seen nothing live involving Hamas, but accept information at face value when we are. Clearly, in an environment where Israel, U.S. government, and nearly all news sources have lied. You already know this, so why just accept a video of a guy in a hall? IDF fakes videos all the time. You also know this. I don't think you understand. I literally said, we don't know. There's not enough information present at this time that gives me full-blown confirmation that Hamas has actually taken hostages. I think you either didn't hear that part or you didn't focus on that. I don't know what happened there, but I openly stated, we do not know at this moment whether or not Hamas has actually taken any Israeli hostages. I simply talked about, if it is true, what kind of blow that would have on public sentiment. I also further talked about, I talked about the principles of war and rules of war and how prisoners of war is fair play. Not only is it perfectly allowed, but prisoners of war are technically better than just killing all enemy combatants, especially because it oftentimes pushes the more powerful occupying entity to make concessions due to the political pressure that it causes. Homie, not just talking about today, kind of hard to, but all that in, I don't think you understand. You're just talking about today. Unless you personally are talking about something else that I have mentioned. And if that's the case, then explain to me what you have a difference in opinion on in terms of my coverage, and we can talk about it. Far Putin, I wouldn't want U.S. business interests in my own neighborhood. All I'm saying is I've sat here and just seen info accepted at face value. No. Here's what we're done with, okay? We're done with this vague posturing, okay? I'm tired of having to try and address genuine schizophrenic hallucinations of people, okay? I need you to fucking tell me exactly something that I've said that you take serious issue with, okay? Something tangible, something that I can, explain to you if you've misunderstood, or maybe something that I've said wrong that I will immediately correct. Every single one of these detractors that comes in here never articulate a tangible position. It is always fucking vibes. Hasan, you are evil. Why am I evil? Because you hate white people. Am I white? Oh, well, I don't know, and I don't even care. You just hate white people, and I hate you for it. Hasan, you take information at face value. Why are you immediately agreeing with Hamas every single time? It's like, what are you talking about? Here's an instance where I'm not actually agreeing with the Hamas side immediately or taking it at face value, and as a matter of fact, being skeptical of it until there's more evidence that is presented. No, that's not what I meant. I meant like in general, you're doing that. Okay, well, tell me an instance where I have done that, and we can address it. They are saying you take Israel's word at face value. No, I definitely don't do that. So I don't know why he's saying that. And I don't think that that's what he's trying to say anyway. Chatters never give coherent, tangible disagreements and simply offer just vague gesturing at feelings. It is? What? Okay. You ignore unreasonable people? I don't. I sometimes try to reason with unreasonable people, hoping that they will actually make a decent point.
The destiny of the future of Germany was to be determined in this decisive battle on Sunday. The Spartakists and left independents made their own preparations, but when the meeting started, the revolutionaries found themselves in an unexpected situation. On the previous day, the right Social Democrats mobilized their whole party machine to build up their own councils made up of hand-picked leaders. The propaganda they deployed was clever. They exploited the utopian wish of many to see a united socialist leadership. So they had used their massive resources to put out thousands of leaflets calling for unity and demanding, quote, no fratricidal strife. On 5 p.m., 3,000 delegates of the Workers' and Soldiers' Councils, which had been elected on the same day, met in Circus Busch in Berlin.
Our mouse is going to be live soon, by the way, and then I'll dive into Russ with her.
The Social Democrats made sure that the soldiers' delegates, where they had a bigger influence, came early and would be seated at the front rows, and the workers at the back on the balconies. The soldiers, who were not as well versed in politics, were given the notion that anyone who criticized the need for unity would be a wrecker and a saboteur. The procedure was a mess. Anytime someone from the left wing spoke, they were overshadowed by unity slogans. When Ebert spoke, he met the mood by calling for socialist unity. When Liebknecht spoke, the crowd shouted, quote, "Unity, unity," and even threatened him with their guns. But still, he maintained his stance just like he had done throughout his political life and warned the delegates that the Social Democrats, quote, "are going along with the revolution today, but were its enemies the day before yesterday. The counter-revolution is already underway. It is already in action. It is already among us." But this was not enough. The majority got its way by their calls for parity. The calls for parity were unreasonable. The USPD had outnumbered the MSPD in the factories, so in order to elect a fair committee, the independents would have had to be represented by a majority of delegates. But with the calls for parity and with the crowds on their side, they managed to push through an executive composed of 12 soldiers' delegates, majority Social Democrats or people under their influence, and 12 workers' delegates, 6 from the MSPD and 6 from the USPD. A joint, quote, revolutionary government, unquote, was formed on November 10th, composed of 3 members from each of the 2 Social Democratic parties, Ebert, Scheidemann and Landsberg from the MSPD, Hase, Dittmann and Emil Barth from the USPD. The newly formed government was imbued with a revolutionary veneer, the naming inspired by the Russian.
Not trying to fight or argue with you. I think you've done a good job with what we have had thrown at us every day, but no one has verified anything from Hamas since October. What are you talking about, dude? What do you mean? First of all, how can you verify something conclusively from the Hamas side? Are there people on the ground? Is there like a working, functioning media apparatus there? Or is Gaza currently victim to an ethnic cleansing campaign? That's number one. Number two, you are still refusing to be specific. You are not mentioning an instance where I have unconditionally taken like whatever Hamas has said without a shred of skepticism. Okay? The only thing you can do is basically look at their own, look at their statements so far and match it with the reality that we know of after the fact. Like, for example, the Gazan Health Ministry, the Palestinian Health Ministry, run by Hamas, they say. And yet, historically, the Palestinian Health Ministry has never given wrong information, has never talked about casualty numbers in too liberal of a term. They've never exaggerated casualty numbers. They've always, according to the UN and according to the US State Department and according to the Israeli occupying forces, their own internal numbers correspond to the Hamas-run Palestinian Health Ministry's casualty reports. So I have no reason to outright deny them at all and consider that to be genocide denial, because that is how genocide denial works. If that's what you are pointing to, then that's one thing. You read out a chatter's comment saying Al Jazeera verified that Hamas took multiple IDF soldiers, and I think chatters think you were saying that and not just reading out a comment. Yeah, but I also very quickly repeated once again, it's no different than North Korean state media. What? North Korean state media on what? If the North Korean state media, if there was active genocide currently occurring in North Korea, and the North Korean state media throughout that time was offering consistently accurate casualty numbers, and independent groups like the United Nations, numerous academics that conduct rigorous third-party investigations after the fact that historically... Oh, you mean it's no different than saying North Korean state media? Okay. Yeah, in an effort to say like they're in the wrong, if that's what you mean. But regardless, if North Korean state media was uniquely consistent in times of conflict, then yes, I would be more charitable to their casualty reporting. Two fun days in a row, you come into Discord with fresh fun ideas, only to then hop on stream, do none of that shit. Wait, what are you talking about? This is exactly what I wanted to do today. Watching like the Betrayal of the German Revolution, like longer videos like this, longer video essays like this is exactly what I wanted to do on a Saturday. That's not a joke. When I said I wanted to like potentially look into red pillars and stuff like that, this is what I meant. I meant like we want to watch maybe I literally said video essays. I want to watch more video essays. I think this is great. It's educational. It's something that I can very quickly turn back to, you know, contemporary political analysis. This is valuetainment, baby.
Revolution, the quote, Council of People's Commissars. It sounded just revolutionary enough, proclaiming Germany a socialist republic and declaring that all power lies with the councils. Of course, this government was everything but revolutionary. The chief aim of Hase and Dittmann, who were chosen from the USPD, was to reunite social democracy, not revolution. Liebknecht was offered a spot, but he refused, realizing that he would be held back by the non-revolutionary majority. And he was right to think that. Emil Barth, associated with the left wing of the independents, did not have the strength to do so. Linked with the so-called People's Commissars were expert advisors, who were usually members of the bourgeois parties, making sure the quote, socialists unquote, left untouched the state apparatus of the old empire. What this meant was shown within a few days when the ostensibly revolutionary government expelled the embassy of Russia. So, Friedrich Ebert was now Chancellor of the Reich and People's Commissar. He was now at the same time a leader of the revolutionary government and head of the old legal government. The right outmaneuvered the left on this decisive day. However, this defeat needs to be put in context. The right had more resources, a well-established party machine, and the imperial staff on their side. They had the support of the ruling classes both within and outside Germany. This is the challenge all socialist revolutionaries face. The revolutionary veneer of the counter-revolutionaries worked. They were able to fool the workers, for now at least. On the same day the so-called revolutionary government had formed, Marshal Hindenburg sent out a message that the decision has been made to collaborate with Chancellor Ebert to, quote, avert the spread of terrorist Bolshevism in Germany. This was the so-called Gröner-Ebert Pact. Years later, when Quartermaster General of the German Army, Wilhelm Gröner, had to defend himself against right-wing critics, he said, quote, the officer corps could only cooperate with the government which undertook the struggle against Bolshevism. Ebert had made up his mind on this. We made an alliance against Bolshevism. There existed no other party which had enough influence upon the masses to enable the re-establishment of a government power with the help of the army. The whole state apparatus remained thus intact. This is why Marx insisted in his writings about the Paris Commune that, quote, the precondition for every real people's revolution is not to transfer the bureaucratic military machine from one hand to another, but to smash it. The explanation of Social Democrat commentators that the MSPD was stuck in a dilemma and had no choice but to collaborate with the imperial forces is particularly funny. Already on the previous day, Ebert ordered all state officials to keep their posts. All personnel, including all the high functionaries of the imperial regime, remained in their positions. And, more importantly, the economic power of the bourgeoisie was left untouched. There were economic reforms that were promised, such as limiting the working day to 8 hours. However, those were necessary concessions to appease the striking workers in order to protect private property and undermine the Marxist appeal. Only days later, representatives of the bourgeoisie signed a deal with the trade unions to form a so-called community of labor to accept some of the workers' demands. Brouet quotes one liberal commentator who would say that the agreement achieved one important thing, quote, it forms a strong bulwark against any attempt to overthrow our social system by violence. The German bourgeoisie used their capital, their media, their connections, and various other means to wage war against the revolutionaries, all with the help of the Social Democrats, of course. They created the Anti-Bolshevik Center with immense funding to print hundreds of thousands of leaflets, sometimes even calling for murder against the Spartakists and their Bolshevik terror, their chaos against the Jews and Bloody Rosa. They then formed the more powerful Anti-Bolshevik League, who would openly call for the murder of Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, and which had its own intelligence service, or as its founder would call it, a quote, active anti-communist counter-espionage organization. The funding for bourgeois media far overshadowed the funding for independent media, which was composed of the contributions of working people. Of course, the government agencies were dominated by counter-revolutionaries as well. Ebert appointed his son as the head of one such agency. The other important organ of class rule are the armed forces, and the High Command had still lots of it. They intended to use it against the armed workers. Because they feared a Bolshevization of Germany from the First General Congress of Workers' and Soldiers' Councils, which was to convene on December 16th, Ebert and General Gröner ordered troops to Berlin on the 15th to prevent this gathering and to regain control of the capital. Gröner told in a court years later that Ebert was in agreement with sending troops into Berlin to disarm the Spartakists. However, the discipline of their field army was breaking down. Many soldiers became swayed by the so-called Bolshevik agitators. Tired of the World War, they had enough of the military discipline. It wasn't clear to them what they were fighting for, and the coup attempt failed. Still, many were killed during that attempt, further radicalizing the workers of Berlin. Without the People's Army, the people have nothing, Mao Zedong famously said a few years later. The revolutionary left, of course.
Bro, I can't consistently be charitable to you. Okay? Think about the negotiations. It's been exactly what Israel actually wants, which is to kill as many Palestinians as possible. Numbers are one thing, but statements and talks and negotiations taken from the known liars. I'm good with the fact that you heard that out and appreciate the response. The fast pace of the chat makes comments at energy level 2. I need someone with a mind with knowledge of the situation to at least look into the facts. This media we've seen for a reason tells a story. Don't sit there and just say, ah, that's crazy. You're better than that. Just give some thought. I hate this. Like, I hate this, like, smarmy fucking attitude that is coming from you. You refuse to fucking mention a singular moment. You refuse to mention a singular moment of disagreement. You did not give a single fucking instance of disagreements. And now you're just like, you've moved into condescension. All the while, I've been so fucking charitable. What is happening? Why are you so patronizing? What do you mean you're better than this? You need to tell me what I need to be better than, instead of just, again, vaguely gesturing at vibes. It's very, very frustrating.
Understood this and called for the formation of a Red Guard, which was passed on November 12th by the executive branch of Berlin councils, but was dropped again after the pressure of the right wing. But there was one armed force the revolutionaries had, which was the security force that had been formed by Emil Eichhorn, who had seized the police headquarters in Berlin. With government forces leaving and Eichhorn controlling the police in Berlin, the ruling classes had to come up with something else. Using funding from big business, Prussian Social Democrat Minister of the Interior Otto Wels created the Republican Soldiers Corps. Among the corps recruiters was a man named Colin Ross, who was later a supporter of Hitler. They would soon clash with the revolutionaries, but they still weren't antagonistic enough. Yes, they were against the Spartakists, but many of them still wanted socialism and hated the old state. They would show themselves not reliable enough for Ebert and the High Command. A more vicious anti-communist right-wing force was needed. There were still thousands of soldiers who identified with the ruling class and the old state. On December 22nd, the Social Democrats in government agreed that Imperial General Georg Merker should organize a highly paid proto-fascist mercenary force called the Freikorps. The Freikorps, for those of you who don't know, were notorious for being connected to the Nazi Party some years later, with many of them joining the SA or SS. Many of the Nazi Party leaders were part of the Freikorps, such as Rudolf Höss or the later leader of the SS, Heinrich Himmler. It's almost funny when liberal commentators describe this period in German history as the time when the left irreparably split. I think it's fairly easy to argue that this was not a fight between the moderate left and the radical left. It was the right wing versus the left wing, capitalism versus socialism. The reactionary Freikorps were not fully ready yet to go in and murder communists. For now, the ruling class had to rely on these shaky government forces who were against the communists, but not with sufficient determination the ruling classes required. Those government forces were deployed on what people later called Ebert's Bloody Christmas. The People's Marine Division, who was stationed at the heart of Berlin's government buildings in the Imperial Palace, had been an issue of contention throughout the German Revolution. Like other sailors and soldiers, they too were at risk of joining the revolution. This was not something the government could afford, so they tried to disperse the sailors by withholding their pay. The sailors reacted by holding Social Democrat leader Otto Wels hostage on December 23rd until they received their pay. Ebert exploited this situation and ordered pro-government troops to storm the Schloss. However, many civilians sympathetic to the revolution joined the fight, and by midday, the sailors had won, with about 70 people killed. This was devastating for the Social Democrats, not only in terms of men lost, but now even the Social Democrat-dominated Berlin executive of the councils condemned the...
This is the fundamental problem, okay, with reformist versus revolutionary actions. Okay, when push comes to shove, do you side with fascists and the rest of the liberal capitalism defenders, or do you engage with the revolutionary trade unionists, socialists, and communists? No, there is no hatred for the Social Democrats. I'm not showing this to you to be like, yeah, this is why Social Democrats fucking suck. Okay? Because ultimately, the revolutionary wing also came from democratic socialism and social democracy. Like those who thought that they were engaging in reform in an honest way. Okay? And there are pivot points. There are, I guess, hinge points, to use the term that Matt Christman also has utilized. There are moments in time when things happen and there's like a supposed fissure. At least from the perspective, like this is a tiny microcosm of a much broader sentiment, a much broader historical moment. But there are points in time when people look at a situation and decide, no, actually, you know what? I do think that like American empire is better. I like what is going on. I don't want to resist. I want to resist change. I am fearful of change. I do not care as much about the many victims, the millions, the untold victims of our current neoliberal order. As long as I can get hamburger and PlayStation 5 at a, in a timely manner, whenever I choose to consume such things. And many people, personally, many people choose order. And order, given the inherent contradictions that have to exist under capitalism, means order through force, order through fascism. L take. Okay. Well, I guess L take. What I don't understand is that the German masses went from being so pro-trade unions and socialists to shut up fashion in such a short period of time. Suppression. Suppression, co-optation of socialism, unifying under a charismatic leader at a time of tremendous economic instability. All of this stuff is happening as a consequence of volatility. People's needs are not met. They're angry. The alternative is squashed, physically, violently squashed. And what remains is a co-opted, safe, docile, aesthetically progressive movement. Or I guess in that situation, socialist, aesthetically, in name only. Utilizing the popular sentiment of giving power back to the workers you launch a campaign of fascism.
Attack. Power was slipping away. They did not even have the manpower to stop thousands of revolutionaries to seize the paper forwards on that day. Even worse, now the independents resigned from the government out of fear of losing support in Berlin, which was now more and more isolating the Social Democrats. It seemed like the revolution regained the high point of November 9th and was close to seizing state power. But there was one problem. The Freikorps were ready, and they could exploit the great weakness of the revolutionary movement. Its disorganization. On the 30th December of 1918, the Spartakists finally broke with the USPD and formed, together with the left radicals, the Communist Party of Germany. It was the first mass-based communist party outside the Soviet Union, and the Soviet leaders had great hopes for it. This was long overdue, according to Pierre Drouet. The revolutionary situation was highly developed, but had suffered a great lack of one coherent plan and organization, which a genuinely communist party can provide, as seen in Russia a year earlier, and soon in China and in many other places around the world. The Spartacus League was not powerful enough to provide a disciplined base to the quickly growing ranks of revolutionary soldiers and workers. A large section of the masses on the streets still mostly associated the USPD with a genuine socialist force. Most of them were not quite aware of the contradictory trends within that party. The constitution of the KPD was happening amidst a situation of great revolutionary confusion. One of the main obstacles in the party formation came from the international communists, and specifically from Johann Knief, who was against uniting with the Spartakists because he hadn't forgotten how they didn't want to separate from the USPD. He believed the formation of a Bolshevik party was the right thing, but it shouldn't include Luxembourg and her supporters, who were alien to the Bolshevik spirit according to him. But the majority of the IKD decided for uniting with the Spartakists at a conference in mid-December. Within the Spartakists, there was also great disagreement about the party formation. Luxembourg and Jogichas were against forming an independent party at least until the next USPD Congress. But Luxembourg let herself be convinced by the international communist leader from the Soviet Union named Karl Radek, who carried the prestige of the October Revolution with him. After the independents rejected a call by Rosa Luxemburg for a
Bernie Sanders
special meeting following the Bloody Christmas, she had enough. And 112 delegates came together in Berlin to found the KPD in a 3-day conference over New Year's in the Festsaal of the Prussian Landtag in Berlin. 83 delegates came from the Spartacist League, and 29 from the International Communists of Germany. Karl Liebknecht held the opening speech with a hard tone. He criticized the, quote, mechanistic, unquote, conception which had guided the leadership until now, and condemned the, quote, failure to understand the supreme importance of mass action itself and overestimation of bureaucratic, parliamentary, and other activities. He continued, quote, we joined the USPD in order to drive forward through our efforts all those who could be driven, in order to make the best elements advance, and to unite them in order to win over the largest possible revolutionary forces, and to organize them in a single revolutionary proletarian party. It was a labor of Sisyphus. He called for an immediate break and the creation of a new party. Various names were discussed. Luxembourg wanted the name to be the Socialist Party, not the Communist Party, in order to salvage some spheres of unity between the parties of the Second International and the Bolsheviks. Her proposal was rejected. The name Communist Party of Germany, Spartacus, won out. Then Radek spoke and proclaimed, quote, German social democracy is dead. It was once the authority throughout the world. It now has no more authority. Then came the turn of Paul Levy, who would soon become the leader of the Communist Party after the murder of Luxembourg and Liebknecht, and he would speak about a topic that would become a major issue for the communists. He declared, quote, the road to the victory of the proletariat can pass only over the corpse of the National Assembly. However, shortly afterward he added, quote, despite all that, we propose to you that we do not stand aside from the elections to the National Assembly. Luxembourg agreed with Levy. None of the delegates were under the illusion that socialism can be brought about by parliamentary means, as those supposed socialists of the Second International thought. It was about whether it would be productive or counterproductive to use the National Assembly as a platform to break illusions among workers. The MSPD had called for a Constituent National Assembly to be convened as soon as possible, while the USPD and the Spartacus League wanted socialism based on the existing structure of workers' and soldiers' councils. So there was a sort of a dual power situation in Germany at the end of 1918, with the councils still having a far more powerful base. But Ebert's role as Chancellor of Germany and as a leader of the Council of People's Representative reflected how the old SPD reformist institutions had still great influence in both structures competing for power. The majority of the delegates were unimpressed by the arguments put forth by those who wanted to participate in the National Assembly. Only 6 days earlier, they had witnessed the humiliations of Ebert's government to crush the sailors in Berlin. Otto Rühle insisted, quote, "We have other tribunes. The street is the great tribune that we have conquered and that we will not abandon, even if they shoot at us." Elections were an unnecessary distraction, he explained, saying the communists are done with, quote, "compromises and opportunism." In the end, the Congress accepted Rühle's counter-proposal to not take part in the elections. Luxembourg's position tracked with Lenin's at the time, to use the parliament as a platform, not as a vehicle for real change. However, it surely didn't mean that Luxembourg was a proponent of bourgeois democracy as today's social democrats and Euro-communists like to paint her. Luxembourg's legacy is constantly being opportunistically revised and demarcated from, quote, "authoritarian," unquote, communism in order to salvage liberal democratic institutions. In 1918, Rosa Luxemburg wrote about the National Assembly, quote, "What is gained, then, with this cowardly detour called the National Assembly? The bourgeoisie's position is strengthened, the proletariat is weakened and confused by empty illusions. Time and energy are dissipated and lost in discussions between the wolf and the lamb. In a word, one plays into the hands of all those elements whose intent is to defraud."
Oh, shit. Look what the cat dragged in, dude. No, it's not Murat. It's Mr. Show. He's saying, don't make fun of my pants. Let me see your pants. Oh, that's disgusting. Oh, you freak. He's wearing tight tights again. He's apologizing for wearing tight tights, but we know as a matter of fact his lies that he says he has nothing left. Yeah. He's relapsed. He's wearing tight tights again. He's wearing his tighty whities again. Big time derail. Yeah, we're going to pause it here. We're going to pause it here because I'm going to move on to the real revolutionary activity, which is, of course, playing Rust. That's right.